The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of Gray Hollow Ranch, and Lena Hartley didn't move. She sat in the cramped wooden box that smelled like horse sweat and someone else's tobacco, staring at her hands. They were rough now, calloused. 3 months ago they'd been soft, pretty even. Travis used to grab them when he was in a good mood, kiss the knuckles, tell her she had lady hands. Then he'd use those same hands as proof she couldn't do anything useful. The driver banged on the roof. "Miss, we're here!" Lena grabbed her suitcase, a sad, scuffed thing held together with rope, and climbed down. Her boots hit Montana dirt for the first time, and she felt the weight of every eye on the ranch turn toward her. She was late. 3 days late. The telegram said to arrive on Tuesday. This was Friday. She didn't have a good excuse. Just the truth. She'd spent 2 days hiding in a hotel room in Billings, trying to convince herself to get back on the stagecoach heading east, back to Charleston, back to her sister's cramped apartment and her brother-in-law's thinly veiled contempt, back to being the family embarrassment. She'd almost done it, almost bought the ticket. Then she'd seen her reflection in the hotel mirror, pale, thin, eyes like something hunted, and she'd made herself a promise, never again. Never small, never silent, never apologizing for taking up space. So here she was, late, unwanted, judged, but here. The ranch stretched out in front of her like something out of a painting nobody would buy. Functional, cold. The house was 2 stories of gray wood that had probably been white once. The barn listed slightly to one left, held up by stubbornness and spite. Fences ran in straight lines toward mountains that looked like they were carved by something angry. It wasn't ugly, it just wasn't alive. A man walked toward her, and Lena knew immediately this was Caleb Wilder. He looked exactly like his letter sounded. Blunt, efficient, done with pleasantries. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 40. Dark hair going silver at the temples. Face weathered the way men's faces get when they spend more time outside than in. He wore work clothes, dusty trousers, a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, boots that had seen actual labor. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Empty. Not cruel. Not cold. Just gone. Like someone had scooped out everything soft and left only the parts that could survive. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at her the way you'd look at a horse you were considering buying. Assessing. Skeptical. "You're late," he said. His voice matched his face. Flat. No anger. No warmth. Just fact. Lena lifted her chin. "I'm here now." The telegram said Tuesday. The stagecoach had other ideas. It wasn't entirely a lie. There had been a delay in Billings, just not the kind she could explain. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just picked up her suitcase like it weighed nothing and started walking toward the house. "You'll stay in the room off the kitchen," he said without looking back. "Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. You're responsible for breakfast and dinner bread. Lunch if there's time. Ranch hands eat first, then me and Maggie." Lena followed, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "Maggie?" "My daughter." He said it the way someone might say my hammer or my fence post. A fact. A thing that existed. "How old is she?" 7. "Does she—" "She doesn't talk." He cut her off without breaking stride. "Don't try to fix that. Don't ask her questions. Don't push. You're here to bake bread, Miss Hartley. That's all." Lena's temper flared, quick and hot, the way it always did when someone told her what she couldn't do. But she swallowed it, barely. "It's Mrs. Hartley, actually." That made him stop, turn. His eyes swept over her left hand. No ring, then back to her face. "Divorced or widowed?" "Does it matter?" "No." He started walking again. "But people will ask. Better to have an answer ready." "Divorced," Lena said. The word still tasted like failure in her mouth. Caleb didn't react, didn't judge, didn't sympathize. He just opened the front door and stepped into a house that felt as empty as his eyes. The inside matched the outside. Clean but joyless. Furniture that was sturdy and plain. Floors that had been scrubbed but never polished. Everything arranged for function, nothing for comfort. It reminded Lena of the apartment she'd shared with Travis toward the end, after he'd sold her piano to pay a gambling debt, after he'd pawned her mother's jewelry, after everything that made it a home had been stripped away to feed his needs. Caleb led her through a front room, past a dining table that could seat 12 but looked like it usually seated 2, and into a kitchen. And Lena stopped breathing, because the kitchen was magnificent. A massive cast-iron stove dominated one wall. 6 burners, 2 ovens, warming drawers, the kind of things she'd only seen in restaurants. Counters ran the length of 2 walls, deep and wide. Shelves stocked with flour, sugar, salt, lard. A window over the sink looked out at mountains. Light poured in like honey. This was a kitchen built by someone who understood food, who respected it. The previous cook left 6 months ago, Caleb said, setting her suitcase down near a door in the corner. We've been making do since then. Badly. Lena ran her hand over the counter. The wood was scarred, worn smooth by years of use. She could feel the history in it. Meals prepared, bread kneaded, life lived. Why did she leave? Retired, went to live with her daughter in California. He paused. She was here 23 years, since before I was born. Something in his voice shifted when he said it. Not quite grief, more like the ghost of grief, the memory of what sadness used to feel like. Lena looked at him. Really looked. And she saw it. The way he held himself. The careful distance, the walls built so high, even he couldn't see over them anymore. This was a man who'd survived something that should have killed him. And part of him wished it had. She knew because she'd seen that same look in her own mirror. Your room's through there, Caleb said, nodding at the corner door. It's small. I'll have one of the hands bring up water for washing. Supper's at 6. I'll expect bread. He turned to leave. Mr. Wilder? He stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you, Lena said quietly, for giving me this chance. His shoulders tensed. For a moment she thought he might say something, acknowledge it, but he just walked out. Lena stood alone in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. Then she opened the door to her new room. Small was generous. It was barely large enough for the narrow bed, a dresser with 3 drawers, and a washstand. No window, no decoration. The kind of room you gave to someone you didn't expect to stay. She set her suitcase on the bed and sat down beside it. The mattress was thin but clean. The room smelled like lye soap and loneliness. This was it, her fresh start. A room the size of a closet, a kitchen built by ghosts, and a man who'd made it clear she was here to work, not exist. Lena pressed her hands against her thighs and felt them shake. Not from fear. She'd promised herself no more fear. From exhaustion. From the weight of everything she'd lost to get here. From the terrible relief of having nowhere left to fall. 3 years ago, she'd been Lena Caldwell, the mayor's daughter. Piano lessons and garden parties. A wedding in St. Michael's Church with 200 guests. A husband everyone said she was lucky to catch. Travis Boone, handsome, charming, from a good family. Also, a liar, a gambler, and a man who slowly, methodically, convinced her that everything wrong in their marriage was her fault. Too emotional, too demanding, too much, always too much. Until she'd believed it. Until she'd made herself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into the shape he insisted she should be. Until the day she'd found the letters. Not just gambling debts. Mistresses. 3 of them. Women he'd promised marriage to while he was married to her. Women he'd borrowed money from, lied to, discarded. And when she'd confronted him, when she'd finally found the spine to say, I'm leaving, he'd laughed. Leave? He'd poured himself another whiskey, calm as Sunday morning. And go where, Lena? Back to Daddy? You think he'll take you in after the scandal? After everyone knows what a failure you are as a wife? I didn't fail. You did. Doesn't matter. He'd smiled. That charming smile that used to make her heart race. Now it just made her sick. You're the woman. You'll be the one they blame. You'll be ruined, sweetheart, completely. And I'll just be a man who had a difficult wife. He'd been right about the scandal, wrong about the rest. She'd left anyway. Packed 2 bags in the middle of the night and walked out of the house they'd rented with money he'd stolen from her inheritance. Filed for divorce through a lawyer who took pity on her. Lived in her sister's spare room for 8 months while Charleston society whispered and pointed and pitied. And then she'd seen the advertisement. Wanted. Cook for ranch in Montana Territory. Must be competent with bread. Room and board provided. Good wages for right applicant. Inquire. C. Wilder, Gray Hollow Ranch. Montana. The actual edge of the world. She'd written the letter that night. Caleb's response came 3 weeks later, terse and practical. He didn't care about her references, didn't ask about her past, just wanted to know if she could start in a month. She'd written back yes before she could talk herself out of it, and now she was here. In a room barely bigger than a coffin, working for a man made of stone, about to bake bread for ranch hands who probably wouldn't taste it. Lena opened her suitcase and pulled out the only thing of value she still owned, her mother's recipe book. Worn leather cover, pages stained with flour and butter, recipes written in her mother's careful hand. Bread, mostly. Her mother had believed bread was a language, that you could say things with yeast and flour that words couldn't touch. Lena pressed the book against her chest and let herself feel it. All of it. The grief, the shame, the desperate, fragile hope that maybe she could build something here. Not happiness. She wasn't naive enough to believe in that anymore. But a life. Small. Hers. A life where nobody told her she was too much. A knock on the kitchen door made her jump. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked out. A young man stood in the doorway holding 2 buckets of water, maybe 20, lanky, with sun-bleached hair and a face full of freckles. He gave her a gap-toothed grin. "Evening, ma'am. I'm Wyatt. Mr. Wilder said to bring you wash water." "Thank you." Lena took the buckets, heavier than they looked. "I'm Mrs. Hartley." "Yes, ma'am. We heard you were coming." He shifted his weight, awkward. "We're real glad you're here. Frank's been doing the cooking since Mrs. Cho left, and, Frank can't cook." Despite everything, Lena almost smiled. "That bad?" "Ma'am, I've eaten boot leather that had more flavor." This time she did smile. "Just a little. I'll see what I can do." Wyatt nodded, pleased. Then his expression shifted, serious. "Mrs. Hartley, a word of advice?" "Yes? Don't take Mr. Wilder personal. He's not, he's a good man, fair, pays on time, doesn't cheat, but he's been—" Wyatt stopped, searching for words. "He's been different since Miss Maggie stopped talking, harder, like he's holding the whole ranch together by force of will." Lena set the buckets down carefully. "What happened to Maggie?" Wyatt's face closed off. "That's not my story to tell, ma'am. Just be patient with the little one. She's been through enough." He tipped his hat and left before Lena could ask more. She stood in the kitchen as the sun started to sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that were almost violent in their beauty. Somewhere in this house was a little girl who'd stopped speaking. Somewhere out there was a man who'd stopped feeling. And here was Lena, who'd stopped believing she deserved better. She looked at the stove, the counter, the shelves stocked with flour. 6 o'clock, supper. Bread expected. She could do this. Bread was something she understood. Bread was predictable, honest. You put in the work, followed the rules, and it rose. Every time. Unlike everything else in her life. Lena rolled up her sleeves, tied on an apron she found hanging by the stove, and got to work. She started with what she knew best. Her mother's basic white loaf. Simple. Reliable. Flour, water, yeast, salt, a touch of honey. She mixed it by hand, feeling the dough come together under her palms. Kneaded it until her shoulders burned. Let it rise while she figured out what else she could make from the pantry's contents. Beef stew. She found a haunch of beef in the cold cellar, potatoes, carrots, onions. Cut everything into chunks and set it simmering. Not fancy, but it would fill bellies. The bread rose. She shaped it into loaves, let it proof, slid it into the oven. And then she waited. That was the thing about bread. You couldn't rush it, couldn't force it. You did the work, and then you had to trust. Trust. Lena almost laughed. She'd trusted Travis, trusted her family, trusted that if she just tried hard enough, made herself good enough, small enough, pleasing enough. The oven timer rang. She pulled out 4 perfect loaves, golden brown and steaming. The smell filled the kitchen like a prayer. For the first time in 3 days, Lena felt something that wasn't fear or shame. She felt useful. At 6 o'clock exactly, the ranch hands started filing in. 8 men, all wearing variations of dust and exhaustion. They stopped when they saw her, stared. She stared back. "Supper's ready," she said. "Stew and bread? Plates are on the counter. Help yourselves." They didn't move. Then an older man, 60 maybe, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen things, stepped forward. "You must be the new cook. I'm Frank." He held out a calloused hand. "Thank the good Lord you're here. These boys were about to mutiny." Lena shook his hand. His grip was firm, respectful. "Mrs. Hartley." "Welcome to Gray Hollow, Mrs. Hartley." Frank glanced at the bread, then back at her. "That smells like hope." Something in Lena's chest cracked. She turned away before he could see it on her face and started ladling stew into bowls. The men ate in silence. Not hostile silence. Hungry silence. The kind that came from men who'd worked 15 hours and had another 3 to go. But she watched them tear into the bread. Watched their faces change when they tasted it. Watched Wyatt close his eyes like he was saying grace. Nobody said anything. They didn't have to. The bread said it for her. "You're worth feeding well." When the hands finished, they cleared their plates without being asked, nodded their thanks, filed back out into the dusk. Lena was cleaning the counter when Caleb walked in. He didn't look at her, just filled a bowl with stew, took a piece of bread, and turned to leave. "Mr. Wilder?" He stopped. "Is Maggie eating?" "I'll bring her a plate." "I could—" "No." He cut her off, still not looking at her. "I'll handle it." He walked out. Lena stood alone at the kitchen, listening to his footsteps climb the stairs. She wanted to argue, wanted to push, wanted to demand to know what had happened to this family that had turned them both into ghosts. But she'd made a promise to herself. No more fighting battles that weren't hers. No more trying to fix men who didn't want to be fixed. She was here to bake bread. That's all. She cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed. Put away the leftover stew. Set dough for tomorrow's breakfast rolls. Wiped down every surface twice. And then she went to her tiny room, lay down on the thin mattress, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the ranch settling into night. Horses in the barn, wind in the grass. The distant call of something wild. Inside, she could hear nothing. This house was silent as a grave. Lena closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tried not to think about the little girl upstairs who'd stopped talking. About the man who moved through this house like a prisoner. About the fact that she'd traded one kind of silence for another. But at least this silence was hers. At least here, nobody was telling her she was too much. She was simply nothing. And maybe, for now, that was enough. Morning came too early. Lena woke to darkness and the sound of boots on floorboards above her head. Caleb, already up, already working. She dressed quickly, plain gray work dress, hair pinned back, apron tied tight, and went to the kitchen. The stove was cold. She got it going, set coffee to brew, pulled out the dough she'd started last night. Breakfast rolls, 2 dozen. She shaped them quickly, efficiently, while the coffee boiled and the sky outside turned from black to gray to pale pink. The hands came in at 6, same as yesterday. Ate standing up, took the rolls she offered without comment, left. Frank lingered. "Mrs. Hartley, you're a gift from above." "It's just bread, Mr. Frank." "No, ma'am, it ain't." He put his hat back on, gave her a long look. "Mrs. Cho used to say bread is how you tell people they matter. Seems like you understand that." He left before she could respond. Lena cleaned up, started prep for the day. She was elbow deep in flour when she heard it. Footsteps. Small. Hesitant. She turned. And there, in the kitchen doorway, stood Maggie. 7 years old, dark hair in 2 braids, wearing a faded blue dress that was too big, bare feet, eyes the same color as her father's, that deep, unsettling gray that seemed to see right through you. She didn't speak, just stood there, watching. Lena's first instinct was to say something, to smile, to introduce herself, to ask questions, but she remembered Caleb's words. Don't push. So instead she just nodded. Once. An acknowledgement. I see you. And went back to kneading. She worked in silence, aware of the little girl watching every move. Measuring flour, adding water, working the dough until it was smooth and elastic, shaping it into loaves. 10 minutes passed. 15. Maggie didn't move. Lena set the loaves to rise and started washing her hands. And then, quietly, like she was talking to herself, my mother taught me to make bread when I was about your age. I was terrible at first, kept adding too much flour, made bricks instead of loaves. She glanced at Maggie. The little girl's expression hadn't changed, but something in her eyes shifted. Attention. Lena kept talking, soft, easy, no pressure. She told me bread is patient. It doesn't care if you mess up. You just start over. Try again. She dried her hands on her apron. I think that's why I still make it. It's one of the few things in the world that's predictable. Maggie's fingers twitched, almost like she wanted to reach for something, but she didn't. And after another minute, she turned and left as silently as she'd arrived. Lena stood in the empty kitchen, heart pounding. She hadn't touched the child, hadn't asked a single question, hadn't tried to force connection. But something had happened. She was sure of it. That night, after supper was cleared and the hands were gone, Lena did something small. She took one of the extra rolls from breakfast, still warm, wrapped in a clean cloth, and set it on the porch railing. No note, no explanation, just bread. The next morning, it was gone. She did it again. Another roll. Same spot. Gone. On the third morning, Maggie was sitting on the porch steps when Lena came out. Still silent, still watchful, but present. Lena set the roll on the railing and went back inside without a word. This became their routine. Every morning, Lena left bread. Every morning, Maggie was there. They didn't speak, didn't touch, didn't force anything. But slowly, so slowly Lena almost didn't notice, Maggie started moving closer. First, she stayed on the steps. Then she moved to the porch railing. Then one morning, she was standing in the kitchen doorway when Lena started baking. Lena didn't react, didn't make a fuss, just worked, and occasionally said something quiet about the dough, about the weather, about nothing important. And Maggie listened. Caleb noticed. Lena saw him watching from the hallway one morning, his face unreadable. She waited for him to tell her to stop, to remind her she was hired to bake, not interfere. But he didn't. He just turned and walked away. 2 weeks passed. The ranch found its rhythm. Lena baked. The hands worked. Caleb existed somewhere in the background, managing everything with grim efficiency. And Maggie started to hover, not quite in the kitchen, but close. Always close. Lena let her. Then came the storm. It started as a wall of black clouds rolling over the mountains. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. The wind picked up, howling through the valley like something alive and angry. Frank came running into the kitchen at 4 in the afternoon. Mrs. Hartley, we need to get everything inside. Stock's in the far pasture. Mr. Wilder's bringing them in, but this storm's coming fast. Lena looked out the window. The sky had turned the color of a bruise. What do you need me to do? Stay inside. Keep the stove hot. We'll need coffee and hot food when we come back. He ran out. Lena got to work, built up the fire, set multiple pots of coffee brewing, started a massive pot of soup, anything she could throw together fast, pulled out every bit of bread she'd baked that morning. Outside, the storm hit. Rain came sideways. Thunder cracked like the sky was splitting. Lightning turned everything white, then black, then white again. Lena worked through it, steady and methodical. This she could do. Feed people, prepare, be useful. And then she heard it. A sound that made her blood freeze. Screaming. Not words, just pure animal terror. She ran to the window. Through the rain, she saw Caleb sprinting toward the barn, shouting something she couldn't hear over the storm. And then she saw Maggie. The little girl was outside, in the storm. Frozen in the middle of the yard, her dress plastered to her small body, her face a mask of absolute horror. Lena didn't think. She ran. The storm hit her like a fist. Rain blinded her. Wind nearly knocked her down, but she kept running. She reached Maggie just as a crack of thunder exploded overhead. The little girl's screams had turned to gasping, airless sobs. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. Lena dropped to her knees in the mud and grabbed Maggie's shoulders. Maggie, Maggie, look at me. But the child couldn't. Her eyes were wide, unseen, lost in whatever nightmare had taken hold. Lena knew that look. She'd seen it in the mirror. Panic. The kind that drowns you. So she didn't try to reason with it. She just pulled Maggie against her chest and wrapped both arms around her, held her tight, anchored her. I've got you, she said into Maggie's hair. I've got you. You're safe. I've got you. Over and over, a rhythm, a heartbeat. And then she started humming. She didn't know where it came from, some half-remembered lullaby her mother used to sing. The melody came back in pieces, but it didn't matter if it was perfect. It mattered that it was steady. Maggie's screams quieted to sobs, her sobs to gasps. And then, so slowly, her small body started to relax. Lena kept humming, kept holding. She didn't try to move Maggie, didn't try to coax her inside, didn't try to fix anything. She just sat in the mud, in the rain, holding a broken little girl, and refused to let go. That's how Caleb found them. He appeared out of the storm like a ghost, soaked to the bone, his face a mixture of fear and something else Lena couldn't name. "Maggie, she's okay," Lena said. "She's okay." Caleb knelt beside them, reached for his daughter, but Maggie turned away from him and burrowed deeper into Lena's arms. Something shattered in Caleb's expression, pain so raw, Lena had to look away. "Let's get her inside," Lena said quietly. Caleb nodded. He tried to take Maggie, but the little girl wouldn't let go of Lena. So Lena stood, lifting her, God, she was so light, and carried her toward the house. Caleb followed in silence. Inside, Lena brought Maggie straight to the stove, wrapped her in blankets, held a cup of warm milk to her lips until she drank. Caleb stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the floor, watching. She hasn't let anyone hold her since... He stopped, swallowed hard. Since it happened. Lena didn't ask what it was. She just kept rubbing warmth back into Maggie's small hands. The little girl's eyes were closing, exhaustion finally winning. "I'll carry her up," Caleb said. This time, Maggie let him. But as he lifted her, her small hand reached out, grabbed a handful of Lena's soaked dress, and held on. "It's okay," Lena whispered. "I'll be here when you wake up." Maggie's hand slowly released. Caleb carried his daughter upstairs. Lena stood alone in the kitchen, shaking, not from cold, from the weight of what had just happened. She'd crossed a line. She'd promised herself she wouldn't get involved, wouldn't try to save anyone, but she'd run into that storm anyway. Because despite everything, despite Travis, despite her family, despite every hard lesson she'd learned about caring too much, she couldn't watch a child suffer and do nothing. The kitchen door opened. Caleb stood there, still soaked, eyes red. "Thank you." His voice cracked on the words. Lena nodded. "Is she asleep?" "Yeah." He stepped into the kitchen, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked at her, really looked. Not through her, not past her, at her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Lena said quietly. "I did." Silence. Then Caleb said something that changed everything. "Her mother died in a storm like this 2 years ago. Maggie saw it happen." Lena's breath caught. "Lightning spooked the horses, knocked the wagon over. Sarah was..." He stopped, forced the words out. "She was gone before I could get to her, and Maggie was there, watching. She hasn't spoken since." "Oh God. I told you to stay away from her." Caleb's voice was rough. "I didn't want her getting attached to someone who'd leave." "I'm not..." "Everyone leaves, Mrs. Hartley. Everyone. And that little girl has been abandoned enough." The accusation hung in the air between them. Lena felt anger rise, hot and defensive. But then she saw it. The way Caleb was holding himself together, the way his hands shook, the way his whole body was wound tight with the effort of not breaking. This wasn't about her. This was about a man who'd watched his wife die and his daughter disappear into silence. A man who'd survived by building walls so high, even he couldn't see over them. A man terrified of hoping for anything ever again. "Mr. Wilder," Lena said carefully, "I don't know how long I'll stay. I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but I'm not going to hurt your daughter. I'm not going to make promises I can't keep. I'm just here, for now. And while I'm here, I'm going to keep leaving bread on that porch. And if she wants to stand in my kitchen and watch me bake, I'm going to let her, that's all." Caleb stared at her, and for a moment she thought he might yell, might fire her on the spot, but he just said, "Why?" "Why what?" "Why do you care? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." Lena thought about lying, about giving some easy, polite answer, but something in his eyes, that same exhausted honesty she saw in her own mirror, made her tell the truth. "Because I know what it's like to disappear," she said quietly. And I know what it's like when someone sees you anyway. Caleb's throat worked. He looked away. And then, so quiet she almost missed it. Don't let her hope for something you can't give her. He walked out. Lena stood in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade upstairs. And she realized, with terrible clarity, that she'd just made a promise she didn't know if she could keep. Because she was starting to care. About this broken house, this grieving man, this silent little girl. And caring was exactly how she'd destroyed herself the first time. The next morning, Lena found Maggie sitting on the kitchen floor, not hovering in the doorway, not watching from a distance, actually inside, legs crossed, back against the wall, staring at nothing. Lena stopped in the doorway, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. She'd been awake since 4, lying in her narrow bed, replaying yesterday. The storm. The feel of Maggie's small body shaking in her arms. Caleb's face when his daughter had reached for Lena instead of him. The warning he'd given her after. Don't let her hope for something you can't give her. She should step back. Should remember why she came here, to disappear, to rebuild herself in silence, to stop trying to fix broken things that weren't hers to fix. But Maggie was sitting on her kitchen floor, and Lena couldn't just ignore that. She walked to the counter and started pulling out flour, salt, butter, moved quietly, giving the child space to leave if she wanted. But Maggie didn't move. Just sat there, watching with those 2 old eyes. Lena measured ingredients, her hands working through muscle memory. She'd barely slept, but Bread didn't care about exhaustion. Bread cared about precision, about following the steps. You're up early, she said, not looking at Maggie, keeping her voice soft, conversational. No pressure. Me too. I've never been good at sleeping. My mind doesn't know how to be quiet. Silence. But Maggie shifted slightly, drawing her knees up to her chest. Lena mixed the dough, kneaded it against the counter. The rhythm soothed something in her. This she understood. Control. Predictability. My mother used to say kneading bread is like telling your worries to shut up for a while, Lena continued. You put all that noise into the dough, push it around, make it do what you want. She folded the dough, pressed it flat, folded again. Doesn't fix anything, but it helps. A floorboard creaked. Lena glanced up. Maggie had moved closer. Not much, maybe 2 feet, but closer. Lena's chest tightened. She turned back to the dough, forced herself to breathe normally. Want to help? The words came out before she could stop them. Stupid. Caleb had said not to push, and here she was, asking questions, creating expectations. But Maggie stood up, walked over to the counter, stopped just at Lena's elbow, staring at the pale mass of dough like it was something miraculous. Lena's hands trembled. She steadied them, tore off a small piece of dough, and set it on the counter in front of Maggie. You can't hurt it, she said quietly. No matter what you do. Worst case, it doesn't rise. Then you just start over. Maggie's small fingers touched the dough. Tentative. Like she was afraid it might burn her. Lena went back to kneading her portion, letting Maggie explore at her own pace. She didn't offer instruction, didn't correct, just worked alongside her, steady and patient. They stayed like that for 20 minutes, Lena kneading, Maggie poking and pressing her small piece of dough into various shapes. The kitchen filled with the quiet sounds of work, the slap of dough against wood, the creak of the floorboards, the tick of the stove. Then Maggie did something that made Lena's throat close up. She shaped her dough into a rough circle, poked 2 holes for eyes, a line for a mouth, a face. Not smiling, not frowning, just existing. Lena set down her dough and looked at the little creation. It was lumpy, uneven, absolutely perfect. That's beautiful, she said, and meant it. Maggie didn't respond, but her shoulders relaxed, just slightly. Lena carefully picked up the dough face and set it on a baking sheet. We'll bake it with the bread. It'll be yours. She expected Maggie to leave then. The moment was over, fragile thing that it was. But the little girl stayed, stood there while Lena shaped the rest of the dough into loaves, stayed while they rose, stayed while Lena slid them into the oven. When the timer went off and Lena pulled out the bread, including one slightly deformed dough face, golden and crispy, Maggie reached for it immediately. Lena wrapped it in a clean cloth and handed it over. Maggie held it against her chest like treasure and walked out of the kitchen without looking back. Lena stood alone, staring at the space where the child had been, and tried not to think about how much that small interaction had cracked something open inside her. The hands came in for breakfast, ate their rolls, made appreciative noises, left. Caleb appeared last, like he'd been waiting for the kitchen to empty. He looked worse than yesterday, shadows under his eyes, jaw tight with exhaustion. He'd probably been up all night checking on Maggie. He poured himself coffee and stood by the window, not speaking. Lena cleaned the counter, trying to give him space, but the silence stretched too long, became too heavy. "She was in the kitchen this morning," Lena said finally. Caleb's shoulders tensed. "I know. I saw her go in. She made something out of dough. A little face. I baked it for her." "Mrs. Hartley, I'm not trying to replace anyone, Mr. Wilder." Lena turned to face him. "I'm not trying to be her mother. I'm just here. And she seems to want to be here too. I can't tell her no." Caleb set his coffee down too hard. Liquid sloshed over the rim. "You can. You just say, 'This isn't a good idea,' and you step back. That's what everyone else has done. Is that what you want?" "What I want—" He stopped, jaw working. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is that little girl upstairs has already lost everything that mattered to her. I won't let her lose anything else." "Then stop pushing away the people who are trying to help." The words came out sharper than Lena intended. But she was tired of tiptoeing around his grief, tired of pretending she didn't see what was happening in this house. Caleb's eyes went cold. "You've been here 3 weeks. You don't know anything about what we've been through." "You're right, I don't. Because you won't tell me. You just stand there, holding everything in like if you let one crack show, the whole thing will collapse." "It will." The admission came out raw, honest. And Lena saw it then, the truth he'd been hiding behind all that control. He wasn't just grieving, he was barely holding on. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and he'd shatter. Her anger drained away, replaced by something uncomfortably close to understanding. "Mr. Wilder," she said quietly, "I'm not asking you to fall apart. I'm just asking you to let your daughter have one thing that makes her feel safe, even if that thing is standing in a kitchen watching someone bake bread." Caleb stared at her. Something shifted in his expression, a hairline fracture in all that stone. "She made Sarah bread," he said finally. "Before. They used to bake together every Sunday. Maggie loved it. After Sarah died, I tried to keep it going. Thought maybe it would help, but she wouldn't touch the dough. Wouldn't even come in the kitchen." "Oh." "Until now," Lena said. "Until now." He picked up his coffee, drained it in one bitter swallow. "So yeah, I'm scared, because if you leave, when you leave, she's going to lose that too." "I'm not planning on leaving. Nobody ever is." He walked out before she could respond. Lena stood in the empty kitchen, her hands still dusty with flour, and felt the weight of what she'd just stepped into. This wasn't just about bread. It was about trust, hope, all the things people gave away and never got back intact. And she'd just promised something she had no business promising. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Maggie appeared in the kitchen most mornings, quiet and watchful. Lena gave her small tasks, measuring flour, stirring batter, shaping rolls. Never forced conversation, never asked about the silence. Just worked alongside her, patient and steady. The bread improved. Lena started experimenting, sourdough, rye, sweet rolls with cinnamon. The hands stopped just eating and started complimenting. Frank declared her rolls were proof heaven exists. Wyatt asked if she could teach him to make biscuits for his sweetheart. Even Caleb, who never said anything, started lingering in the kitchen longer, drinking his coffee slower, sometimes watching Lena work with an expression she couldn't quite read. The ranch itself started feeling less like a tomb. Small things changed. Someone fixed the front porch railing. The barn got a fresh coat of paint. Lena heard laughter from the bunkhouse one night. Actual laughter, rough and surprised, like the men had forgotten they knew how. But underneath the normalcy, tension was building. It started with a letter. Frank brought it in one afternoon, his face grim. "This came from Mr. Wilder, from town." Lena took it, recognizing the expensive paper, the embossed return address. Official. Legal. She found Caleb in the barn repairing a broken stall door. He looked up when she approached, saw the letter in her hand, and his whole body went rigid. "When did that arrive?" Just now. Frank brought it from the post office. Caleb set down his hammer and took the envelope, stared at it like it might bite him. Then he tore it open and read in silence. Lena watched his face change, watched color drain from his skin, watched his hands start to shake. Mr. Wilder? He crumpled the letter and threw it against the wall. That son of a bitch. Lena had never heard him swear before, never seen him lose control. It was alarming how much fury could fit inside one man. What happened? Warren Gant happened. Caleb's voice was pure venom. He's calling in the loan. What loan? The one I took out 2 years ago to buy feed during the drought. I've been paying it back. On time. Every month. But apparently that's not good enough for Gant. He wants the full amount. Now, 30 days. Lena's stomach dropped. Can he do that? He owns the bank. He can do whatever he wants. Caleb paced the barn like a caged animal. This is about the land. It's always been about the land. Gant's been trying to buy Gray Hollow for 5 years. I keep saying no. So now he's going to take it anyway. How much do you owe? $3,000. Lena's breath caught. That was a fortune. Do you have it? Caleb's laugh was bitter. No, I have maybe 800 saved. The rest is in the stock, the equipment, the land itself. I'd have to sell everything to pay him back. Then you sell something. The cattle, at the prices Gant's been paying, I'd get maybe half what they're worth. And without the stock, we can't run the ranch. It's a trap, Mrs. Hartley. Either I sell to him at his price, or I lose everything to the bank. Either way, he wins. Lena picked up the crumpled letter and smoothed it out. Read the cold legal language demanding payment in full within 30 days, or foreclosure proceedings would begin. It was signed Warren Gant in flowing script, like he'd enjoyed writing it. There has to be another way, she said. There isn't. Caleb's voice had gone flat again. Dead. I've been over the numbers 100 times. I can't make $3,000 appear out of thin air. Then we make it. He stared at her. What? We make it. $3,000 in 30 days. It's possible. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Lena's mind was already racing, calculating. The bread sells in town, right? At the general store? A few loaves a week. Barely covers the flour. Because you're only sending a few loaves a week. What if we sent 100? Caleb shook his head. Nobody needs 100 loaves. Not here, but the mining camps do. The railroad crews, the logging camps up north. They're full of men with money and no time to bake. They'd pay premium prices for fresh bread delivered regularly. You're talking about running a full-scale bakery operation. That would take equipment we don't have, labor we can't afford. We have this kitchen. We have a stove that can handle volume. We have me. Lena met his eyes. And we have men on this ranch who can deliver. It's possible, Mr. Wilder. Difficult, but possible. Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Even if we could produce that much bread, even if we could sell it, the math doesn't work. 100 loaves a day at what, 20 cents each? That's $20 a day. Times 30 days is $600. We'd still be short $2,400. Not if we also sell pies, cakes, pastries. Not if we charge more for specialty orders. Not if we work every single hour we have. Lena grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. I know it sounds insane, but what's the alternative? Give up? Let Gant win? Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Not quite hope, but not quite defeat either. Why do you care? He asked. This isn't your fight. If the ranch goes under, you find another job. You'll be fine. Lena thought about lying, about giving some noble reason. But she was tired of lying, even to herself. Because I'm tired of watching bullies win, she said quietly. And because Maggie's finally starting to talk with her hands in dough, and because she stopped, swallowed. Because for the first time in years, I feel like I'm building something instead of watching it fall apart. I don't want to lose that. Caleb studied her face, looking for cracks maybe, for signs she'd break under pressure. But Lena had already been broken. This was just putting pieces back together. Okay, he said finally. Okay. We try it your way. But if this fails, it won't. If it fails, he continued, I need you to promise me something. You take Maggie, and you get out before Gant takes possession. I've got a sister in Oregon. She'd take her. I need to know Maggie won't be here when this place gets torn apart. Lena's chest constricted. You're talking like you're planning to stay behind. Someone has to. That's stupid. That's reality, Mrs. Hartley. Gant's not just after the land, he's after me. This is personal. Sarah rejected him before she married me. He's never forgiven that. So yeah, if this goes bad, I stay. I face whatever comes. And you make sure my daughter doesn't watch it happen. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being dramatic, self-destructive, idiotic. But she saw the truth in his face. This wasn't martyrdom. This was a father trying to protect the only thing he had left. Fine, she said. I promise. But it's not going to come to that. You don't know that. No, but I'm going to work like I do. She turned and walked back to the house before he could see how much his words had shaken her. That night, she sat down with paper and pencil and started planning. Production schedules, ingredient orders, delivery routes. She worked until midnight, then passed it, crossing out numbers and starting over, trying to find a path through impossible math. Frank found her at 2 a.m, still hunched over the kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled papers. Mrs. Hartley, you should be sleeping. Can't, too much to figure out. He sat down across from her, moving slowly. His joints always hurt more at night. Mr. Wilder told us about the loan, about your plan. Lena rubbed her eyes. They burned from exhaustion. You think I'm crazy? No, ma'am. I think you're brave. But brave don't always mean smart. He picked up one of her calculations, studied it. You're planning to make 100 loaves a day. You realize that's impossible for one person, right? I'll manage. No, you won't. You'll kill yourself trying. He set the paper down. But if you had help. Lena looked up. Help? The hands. Most of us don't know bread from shoe leather, but we can learn. We can knead dough, shape loaves, tend ovens. Free you up to do the skilled work. Frank, I can't ask. You're not asking. I'm offering. We all are. He leaned back, his weathered face serious. This ranch is the only home most of us have got. Mr. Wilder's been fair to us, even when times were hard. We're not going to stand by and watch some banker steal it out from under him. Lena felt something hot press behind her eyes. She blinked it back. I don't know if this will work. Neither do we, but we'd rather go down fighting than not fight at all. Over the next 3 days, the kitchen transformed into something between a bakery and a battlefield. Lena taught the ranch hands the basics, how to measure flour, how to knead without overworking, how to tell when dough had risen enough. They were terrible at first, burned loaves, dense bricks, shapes that looked like abstract art gone wrong. But they kept trying. Wyatt turned out to have a gentle touch with pastry. Frank could manage basic white loaves with grim determination. Even Quiet Pete, who rarely spoke, found he had a talent for shaping rolls. Lena worked them hard. Started at 4 a.m, didn't stop until midnight. She was everywhere at once, correcting technique, managing the ovens, planning the next day's production. Her hands were raw from flour. Her back ached from standing. She lost weight she didn't have to lose. But the bread improved. By day 5, they were producing 50 loaves a day. By day 8, 75. By day 10, they hit 100. And Caleb, who'd been managing the business side, finding buyers, negotiating prices, arranging deliveries, came back from town with news. The mining camp at Silver Creek wants 100 loaves a week. The railroad crew at Junction Pass wants 50 every 3 days. I've got interest from 2 logging camps and the fort. Lena looked up from the dough she was kneading. Her hair had come loose from its pins. Flour dusted her cheeks. She was so tired she could barely see straight. Can we handle that volume? If we keep this pace, if nothing breaks, if nobody gets sick. He paused. If you don't collapse. I'm fine. You're not. You're running on fumes and stubbornness. Then I'm running on what I've got. Caleb crossed to where she stood and gently took the dough from her hands. Take a break. I don't have time. Take a break. His voice was firm but not unkind. You're no good to anyone if you kill yourself doing this. Lena wanted to argue, but her hands were shaking and her vision kept blurring at the edges, and she was so damn tired. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. Caleb poured her coffee, set it in front of her without comment. They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds were the tick of the stove and the distant murmur of the hands in the bunkhouse. Why are you doing this? Caleb asked finally. Lena didn't lift her head. I told you, Because I hate bullies. That's not the whole truth. No, it wasn't. Lena raised her head and looked at him. Really looked. At this man who was trying so hard to hold everything together, who'd lost his wife and was losing his daughter to silence and was about to lose his home. Because nobody fought for me, she said quietly. When my marriage was falling apart. When Travis was gambling away everything we had. When he was lying and cheating and making me feel like I was the problem. Nobody stood up and said, "This is wrong." They just watched. And when I finally left, they blamed me for it. Caleb's expression shifted, softened. So yeah, Lena continued, maybe this is selfish. Maybe I'm fighting for you because I wish someone had fought for me. But it doesn't change the fact that you deserve better than what Gant's trying to do. You deserve better than what happened to you too. The words were quiet, simple, but they hit Lena like a physical blow because nobody had ever said that to her. Not her family, not her friends, nobody. She stood up quickly before the tears could come. I should get back to work. Lena. It was the first time he'd used her first name. It stopped her cold. She turned. Caleb was standing now too, looking uncomfortable, like he'd surprised himself. Thank you, he said. For this. For everything. I'm not good at saying things, but I need you to know that what you're doing, it matters. Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she went back to kneading dough, and Caleb went back to his accounts, and they worked side by side in comfortable silence until the sun came up. 2 weeks in, disaster struck. Lena was pulling loaves from the oven when she heard the scream. She dropped the bread pan and ran outside. Wyatt was on the ground, clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers. Pete was trying to stop the bleeding with a rag that was already soaked through. What happened? Lena dropped to her knees beside them. Wagon wheel broke, Pete said, his face pale. Came down on his arm. I think it's broken. Wyatt was white with pain, breathing in short gasps. I'm fine. I'm okay. You're not okay. Lena gently moved his hand to see the damage. The gash was deep, bleeding heavily. And yeah, the arm was definitely broken. She could see the unnatural angle. Frank, get the wagon! Caleb was suddenly there, taking control. We need to get him to the doctor in town. I can work, Wyatt protested weakly. Shut up, Caleb said, not unkindly. You're going to the doctor. They loaded Wyatt into the wagon. Frank drove. Caleb went with them, and Lena stood in the yard watching them disappear down the road, feeling their carefully constructed system start to crack. Wyatt had been handling deliveries, running the routes, building relationships with buyers. Without him, they were short-handed at the worst possible time. She went back inside and found the other hands looking at her, waiting for direction. All right, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. Pete, you're on deliveries now. I'll write out the routes. Frank can show you the stops when he gets back. Everyone else, we keep working. We don't have time to fall apart. They nodded and got back to it. But Lena felt the weight settling on her shoulders, the impossible math getting more impossible. They'd lost their best delivery driver. They were already pushing everyone to their limits, and they still needed to make another $2,000 in the next 2 weeks. She went back to the kitchen and started kneading with a violence that surprised her, slamming the dough against the counter, folding it with more force than necessary. This was going to fail. She'd convinced everyone to try, had made them believe it was possible, and now it was going to fall apart, and it would be her fault. You're going to kill that dough. Lena spun around. Maggie was standing in the doorway, holding her little dough creation from weeks ago. It had hardened into something like pottery now. The child carried it everywhere. Sorry, Lena said, trying to gentle her movements. I'm just frustrated. Maggie walked over to the counter, set down her dough face, and reached for the mass Lena had been abusing. For a moment, Lena didn't understand. Then she realized Maggie was offering to help. You don't have to, but Maggie was already kneading, her small hands working the dough with surprising competence, mimicking what she'd watched Lena do 100 times. Lena's throat tightened. Thank you. They worked together in silence, and slowly Lena felt the panic recede. Just a little. When Caleb got back that night, Lena was still in the kitchen. It was past midnight. She was alone now, everyone else finally gone to sleep. But she couldn't stop. Didn't dare stop. Wyatt? She asked, without looking up. Broken arm, deep cut. He'll heal, but he's out for at least 6 weeks. Lena's hands faltered. 6 weeks. They didn't have 6 weeks. They barely had 2. We'll manage, she said. Will we? The question hung in the air, honest, brutal. Lena set down the dough and finally looked at him. I don't know, maybe. If nothing else goes wrong. If we work every hour. If we get lucky. That's a lot of ifs. It's all we've got. Caleb leaned against the counter, exhaustion written in every line of his body. You should rest. So should you. Can't. Numbers don't add up. Even with the new contracts, we're still short. I've been trying to figure out where else we can cut costs, but there's nothing left to cut. Lena wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the stove, put on water for coffee. They were going to need it. What if we didn't just sell bread? She said slowly. What do you mean? Special orders, wedding cakes, birthday cakes. Things people will pay premium prices for. I could do it if I worked through the nights. Lena, you're already working through the nights. Then I'll sleep less. You'll die. I won't. She poured coffee for both of them. I've survived worse than exhaustion. Caleb took the cup she offered. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. This isn't just about the ranch anymore, is it? He said quietly. What do you mean? You're trying to prove something. To yourself, maybe. That you're worth more than what your husband said you were. That you can do impossible things. He paused. You don't have to destroy yourself to prove that, Lena. Hearing him say her name still did something strange to her chest. Yes, she said. I do. Because if I stop, if I let myself rest, I'll remember how tired I am, how scared, how much I've already lost, and I can't afford to remember that right now. Caleb set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. They were standing close, closer than they'd ever been. You haven't lost this, he said. You're still here, still fighting. For now. That's all any of us have. For now. Something passed between them. An understanding. A recognition. They were both survivors. Both people who'd been broken by loss and were trying desperately to build something new from the pieces. Lena looked away first. Stepped back. Created distance. I should finish this batch, she said. Caleb nodded, but he didn't leave. He just rolled up his sleeves and started helping her shape loaves. They worked until dawn, not talking, just existing in the same space, doing the same work, held together by exhaustion and shared purpose. And when the sun finally came up and the first loaves went into the oven, Lena allowed herself to think, just for a moment, that maybe impossible wasn't quite so impossible after all. Then Pete came running in, his face stricken. Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Wilder, we've got a problem. Caleb was on his feet immediately. What kind of problem? The mining camp at Silver Creek. They're saying they won't take delivery anymore. Said someone named Gant offered them bread at half our price if they cancel the contract. The bottom dropped out of Lena's stomach. Gant wasn't just squeezing them financially, he was actively sabotaging their only chance to survive. Caleb's face went hard. That son of a bitch. What do we do? Pete asked. Caleb looked at Lena. She looked back. And in that moment, they both knew the same thing. The fight was just beginning. Lena stared at Pete, trying to process what he'd just said. The Silver Creek contract had been their biggest deal, 50 loaves a week at premium prices. Without it, the numbers didn't just get harder. They became impossible. When did Gant make the offer? Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. Yesterday, according to the foreman. He came to town personally, told them he was starting his own bakery operation. Said he could beat any price we were offering. He doesn't have a bakery, Lena said. Doesn't matter. Caleb was already moving toward the door. He's got money. He can hire bakers. Undercut us until we're finished, then jack the prices back up once we're gone. Where are you going? To Silver Creek, to talk to the foreman myself. Lena grabbed her coat. I'm coming with you. No, you need to stay here and keep production going. Frank can handle production for a few hours. You need me there. Caleb turned, frustration clear on his face. Why? Because you're going to go in there angry and make threats, and that'll just make things worse. You need someone who can actually negotiate. I can negotiate. No, you can't. You're terrible at it. You're honest and direct and completely incapable of playing politics. Lena was already tying her bonnet. I, on the other hand, spent 3 years navigating Charleston society. I know how to smile and lie and make people think they're getting a deal when they're actually getting played. Something flickered in Caleb's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Fine, he said, but I'm driving. They took the wagon and made it to Silver Creek in just under 2 hours. The mining camp sprawled across a hillside like a wound in the earth. Rough wooden buildings, muddy streets, the constant sound of machinery grinding away at rock. Men moved through the camp with the exhausted shuffle of people who worked 16-hour days in the dark. The foreman's office was a shack at the center of it all. Inside, a barrel-chested man with gray whiskers looked up from a desk covered in paperwork. Mr. Wilder, Mrs. Hartley. He didn't stand. Figured you'd be showing up. Mr. Carson, Caleb's jaw was tight. We had a contract. Had being the operative word. Gant made us a better offer. At half our price, he's losing money on every loaf. That's his problem, not mine. My job is feeding these men as cheaply as possible. You understand business, Wilder, nothing personal. Lena stepped forward before Caleb could respond. She'd put on her Charleston smile, the one that was all warmth and no truth. Mr. Carson, may I ask you something? He looked at her warily. Sure. How's the bread been? The quality? It's fine. Just fine? Carson shifted in his chair. It's good. Better than we had before, if I'm honest. And the deliveries, on time, consistent? Yeah, you've been reliable. And you believe Mr. Gant will maintain that same quality and reliability? He says he will. Lena let the smile drop. Mr. Carson, I'm going to be blunt with you. Warren Gant doesn't care about feeding your men. He cares about destroying my employer. This isn't business for him. It's personal. He'll keep prices low until we're gone, then he'll either jack them back up or stop delivering altogether. Either way, you and your men lose. Carson's eyes narrowed. You got proof of that? Common sense. Ask yourself why a banker suddenly wants to run a bakery operation. Ask yourself how he can afford to lose money on every sale. The answer is he can't. Not long term. He's counting on this being a short-term game. And what makes you different? We need this contract to survive. That makes us motivated, reliable. We can't afford to disappoint you because we have everything to lose. Lena leaned forward. But more than that, we actually care about the product. Those loaves we've been sending. I make them myself, every single one. I know what it's like to work until your body gives out and need food that actually sustains you. Gant's going to send you the cheapest thing he can produce. We send you the best we can make. Carson studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. That true? She makes every loaf? Most of them, Caleb said. And she trains the rest of us. Quality control is the first thing she checks every morning. Huh. Carson scratched his beard. Look, I appreciate the speech, Mrs. Hartley. I do. But at the end of the day, I got shareholders breathing down my neck about costs. I need that lower price. Lena's mind raced. They couldn't match Gant's price. They'd already cut margins to the bone. But maybe they didn't have to. What if we added value instead of cutting price? She said suddenly. What kind of value? Variety. Right now we send you standard white loaves. What if we also sent rye? Sourdough. Sweet rolls for Sunday mornings? Same weekly cost to you, but more options for your men. Carson's expression shifted, interested despite himself. And Lena continued, pressing her advantage. What if we threw in a dozen meat pies every week? Fresh baked, real beef and vegetables. Your men would riot over that. Meat pies. Carson's eyes lit up. My boys would kill for fresh meat pies. We can do that. Same price as our current contract. We just diversify what we're sending. Can you actually produce that volume? Lena had no idea if they could. They were already stretched impossibly thin, but she didn't let that show on her face. Yes, she said firmly. We can. Carson looked at Caleb. What do you say, Wilder? Can she deliver on this? Caleb met Lena's eyes. She saw the question there. Can we? She gave the tiniest nod. She can, Caleb said. Carson drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, calculating. All right, he said finally. You've got 1 week to prove it. Send me the variety batch. If my men like it better than what Gant's offering, the contract stays with you. And if they don't, then I go with Gant's price. Business is business. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a chance. Deal, Lena said, extending her hand. Carson shook it. His grip was firm, testing. Don't make me regret this, Mrs. Hartley. I won't. They walked back to the wagon in silence. Caleb helped her up, then climbed into the driver's seat and took the reins. But he didn't move. Just sat there, staring at nothing. You just promised we'd make meat pies, he said finally. I know. We've never made meat pies. I know. And you have no idea if we can actually produce that volume while maintaining everything else. I know. Lena looked at him. But what else was I supposed to do? Let him take Gant's deal? Caleb started laughing. It was a rough, rusty sound, like he'd forgotten how. You're insane. Probably. We're going to kill ourselves trying to pull this off. Probably. He shook his head, still smiling despite everything. All right then, let's go make some meat pies. They drove back to Gray Hollow in the fading light, and Lena tried not to think about what she'd just committed them to. More work, more pressure, more impossible promises. But for the first time since arriving at this ranch, she felt something other than fear or exhaustion. She felt alive. Back at the ranch, she gathered everyone in the kitchen and explained the situation. The hands listened with expressions ranging from concern to horrified. Meat pies, Frank said slowly, on top of everything else. On top of everything else, Lena confirmed. That's a lot of meat. We've got cattle. We've got cattle we need for selling, Mrs. Hartley. We can't just butcher them for pies. Caleb stepped in. We've got 3 steers that aren't going to make market weight anyway. Been planning to butcher them for winter stores. We use that. That won't last long, Pete pointed out. It'll last long enough to get through the trial week. After that, if Carson keeps the contract, we negotiate meat into the price. The hands exchanged glances. Wyatt, his arm in a sling, spoke up from where he was sitting. I can still help with prep work, one-handed peeling and chopping. You should be resting, Lena said. I'll rest when we've saved the ranch. He stood up, wincing. What do you need me to do? Looking at these men, exhausted, pushed to their limits, volunteering for more, Lena felt something crack in her chest. These weren't her people. This wasn't her fight. Except it was. Somehow, without planning it, she'd become part of this place. All right, she said, pushing the emotion down. Here's what we're going to do. Frank, you and Pete handle the regular bread production. I'll work on perfecting the meat pie recipe. Wyatt, you're on vegetable prep. Caleb, I'll butcher the steers tomorrow morning. Can you do that and still handle deliveries? I'll make it work. They worked through the night. Lena tested pie crust recipes. Too tough, too crumbly, too bland. She tried different spice combinations for the filling, experimented with cooking times and temperatures. By 3 in the morning, she had something that tasted right. Rich beef in dark gravy, vegetables that held their shape, crust that was flaky and golden. She made 6 as a test batch, set them to cool. Then she nearly fell asleep standing up. Caleb caught her elbow. Bed, now. You need to sleep. We still have 4 days before the trial delivery. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. He was right. Lena was so tired her hands were shaking. She'd been running on coffee and stubbornness for 2 days straight. 2 hours, she said. Wake me in 2 hours. 4. 3. Deal. Lena stumbled to her room and fell onto the bed without even removing her boots. Sleep took her like a stone dropping into dark water. She woke to sunlight streaming through a crack in the door and the smell of fresh coffee. She'd slept more than 3 hours. Closer to 6, based on the angle of the light. She lurched upright, panic flooding through her. All the work she should have been doing. The kitchen was already humming with activity when she emerged. The hands were at their stations working through the regular production. And at the table, carefully shaping pie crusts with intense concentration, was Maggie. The little girl looked up when Lena entered. Didn't smile, but her eyes brightened slightly. Morning, Caleb said from the stove. He was tending multiple pots, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled. Coffee's fresh. Figured you needed sleep more than you needed to work. You should have woken me. And listened to you argue about it? No thanks. He poured her a cup, handed it over. Besides, we managed fine. Maggie's been helping with the pies. Lena looked at the little girl's handiwork. The crusts weren't perfect. Some were uneven. Others had fingerprints pressed into the dough. But they were recognizable. Functional. These are beautiful, Maggie, Lena said softly. Maggie ducked her head, but Lena caught the ghost of a smile. The next 4 days blurred together in a haze of flour and exhaustion. They produced bread, rolls, pies, everything they'd promised, and more. Lena worked until her vision blurred. The hands rotated through shifts, no one sleeping more than a few hours at a time. And somehow, impossibly, they hit their targets. On the morning of the trial delivery, Lena packed the wagon herself. 100 loaves of varied bread, white, rye, sourdough. 24 sweet rolls with cinnamon sugar. 12 meat pies, still warm, wrapped in cloth. It looked like hope packaged for transport. Caleb came to help load the last crate. He moved stiffly. His back was bothering him from sleeping on the kitchen floor to stay close to the ovens. This is good work, Lena. She wiped sweat from her forehead. It's a gamble. The best things are... Pete drove the delivery wagon. Caleb went with him. Lena stayed behind to keep production running, but she couldn't focus. Couldn't stop imagining Carson's face when he saw what they'd sent. Couldn't stop calculating how quickly they'd fail if he rejected it. They were gone for 6 hours. When the wagon finally rolled back into the yard, Lena ran outside, her heart hammering. She couldn't read Caleb's expression from a distance. He climbed down slowly, walked toward her. Well? She demanded. Caleb's face was carefully neutral. Carson said, What? What did he say? A smile broke across his face. He said his men nearly started a riot over the pies. Half of them wanted to know if we'd sell them individually. The other half wanted to hire you away from me. Relief hit Lena so hard she actually swayed. We got the contract? We got the contract. He's doubling the weekly order, and he wants to know if we can supply 2 other camps he manages. Lena pressed her hands to her face. They were shaking. We did it. We actually did it. You did it. Caleb's voice was soft. This was your plan. Your work. Our work. She lowered her hands, met his eyes. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Something passed between them. Understanding. Gratitude. Something else Lena wasn't ready to name. Then Frank was shouting from the bunkhouse, and Pete was whooping, and the moment broke as the whole ranch erupted in celebration. That night, they had a real meal. Not just bread and stew, but roasted chicken, vegetables from the garden, fresh rolls with butter. Lena had even made a cake, small, simple, but sweet enough to mark the occasion. Everyone crowded around the big dining table, the hands, Caleb, even Maggie, sitting close to Lena's elbow. Frank raised his coffee cup. To Mrs. Hartley, for saving our stubborn hides. To Mrs. Hartley, the others echoed. Lena felt her cheeks flush. I didn't do it alone. Let us toast you, woman, Wyatt said, grinning. You earned it. She looked around the table at these men who'd worked themselves half to death because she'd asked them to. At Caleb, watching her with something warm in his eyes. At Maggie, whose small hand had crept over to rest near Lena's plate. Thank you, she said quietly. All of you. They ate and talked and laughed. For a few hours, the weight of the impossible lifted. They were just people sharing a meal, and it was enough. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Lena stood in the kitchen cleaning the last of the dishes. She was bone-tired but couldn't quite bring herself to sleep yet. The day felt too fragile, like if she closed her eyes it might disappear. Footsteps behind her. Caleb carrying 2 coffee cups. Thought you might want company, he said. They sat at the table, the same spot where she'd planned this whole insane operation weeks ago. The kitchen was quiet, except for the pop and settle of the cooling stove. We're still short, Caleb said eventually. Even with the expanded contracts, we're closer, but we need another $1,000 in 2 weeks. The relief Lena had been feeling curdled. How much can we make with what we have now? Maybe $700, if everything goes perfectly. If we don't lose any more contracts. If nothing breaks. So we need to find another $300 somehow. Yeah. They sat in silence, both of them too tired to see solutions. Then Lena remembered something. The specialty orders, the wedding cakes and birthday cakes I mentioned. Have you been pursuing those? Haven't had time. Make time. Rich people pay stupid money for fancy cakes. One wedding could bring in $50 or more. Do you know how to make fancy cakes? I can learn. I've got my mother's recipe book, and people in town must be getting married, having birthdays. We just need to let them know we're available. Caleb looked at her like she was suggesting they fly to the moon. Lena, you're already working 20-hour days. You can't take on more. Watch me. You're going to kill yourself. Then I'll die doing something that matters instead of just existing. She met his eyes, daring him to argue. I'm not giving up, Caleb. Not when we're this close. He stared at her for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted, softened. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. I'm taking it as one anyway. Caleb shook his head, but he was almost smiling. Fine. We'll try it your way. But I'm putting an ad in the town newspaper tomorrow. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. The ad ran the next day. Simple and direct. Gray Hollow Bakery. Custom cakes for all occasions. Inquire at General Store. 3 days passed with no response. Then a woman showed up at the ranch in a fancy carriage, looking completely out of place among the cattle and dust. Lena was elbow-deep in dough when Frank came to get her. Mrs. Hartley, there's a lady here to see you. Says her name is Mrs. Thornton. Lena wiped her hands and went outside. The woman standing by the carriage was maybe 50, dressed in expensive fabrics that had no business being this far from civilization. She looked Lena up and down with the kind of assessment Lena remembered from Charleston, measuring worth by appearance. Mrs. Hartley? Yes, ma'am. I'm Constance Thornton. My daughter's getting married in 3 weeks. I saw your advertisement. Lena's heart kicked up. You're interested in a wedding cake? Possibly. I need to see samples of your work first. My daughter is marrying into the Carmichael family. This needs to be perfect. The Carmichael family. Even Lena had heard of them. Old money, influence that stretched all the way to the territorial capital. Of course. What kind of cake were you envisioning? Mrs. Thornton described something elaborate. 3 tiers. White frosting with delicate piping. Sugar flowers. The kind of thing Lena had seen at fancy Charleston weddings, but had never attempted herself. I can do that, Lena said, with more confidence than she felt. Can you? Because I was told the best baker in the territory is in Helena. I'm willing to travel there if your work isn't up to standard. Challenge accepted. Give me 3 days, Lena said. I'll make you a sample tier. If you don't think it's perfect, I won't charge you a cent. Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose. That's quite a guarantee. I stand by my work, Mrs. Thornton. The woman studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Very well, 3 days. But I warn you, I have very high standards. So do I, ma'am. After Mrs. Thornton left, Lena stood in the yard trying not to panic. She'd just promised to make something she'd never made before. Something that needed to be perfect for the most demanding client she'd ever had. Caleb found her 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot. I heard you took a wedding cake commission. I did. Have you ever made a 3-tier wedding cake before? No. Do you know how? Not exactly. So you just promised a woman with Carmichael money that you'd make her daughter's wedding cake in 3 days, having never done it before. Yes. Caleb was quiet for a beat. Then he started laughing, that rough, surprised laugh that came from somewhere deep. You really are insane. Are you going to help me or just stand there being unhelpful? He stopped laughing. What do you need? Every decorating tip in my mother's recipe book. Patience. And probably a miracle. Fresh out of miracles. But I can manage the other 2. That night, while the ranch slept, Lena worked on the sample tier. She baked a simple cake first, nothing fancy, just testing the recipe. It came out dry. She tried again, too dense. Again, too sweet. On the 4th attempt, she got it right. Moist, delicate, with a flavor that was subtle but present. Then came the frosting. She made 7 batches before getting the consistency right. Smooth enough to spread, stiff enough to hold shape, white as fresh snow. The piping was harder. Her hands were too rough from bread making, not delicate enough for the tiny flowers and scrollwork Mrs. Thornton wanted. She practiced on parchment paper until her fingers cramped. Made mistakes. Started over. made more mistakes. By dawn, she had something that almost looked right. Caleb walked in just as she was adding the final touches, tiny sugar roses she'd formed with shaking hands. He stopped and stared. Lena, it's not perfect. I can see the flaws. The piping isn't quite even on this side, and the roses are different sizes. It's beautiful. She looked at him. He was staring at the cake like it was something precious. You really think so? I think Mrs. Thornton is going to hire you on the spot. He moved closer, examining the details. I think you're capable of things you don't give yourself credit for. Lena's throat tightened. She was so tired, so scared this wouldn't be good enough, so desperate for this to work. Thank you, she whispered. Mrs. Thornton arrived exactly 3 days later, at noon, as promised. Lena had the sample tier displayed on the kitchen table, positioned to catch the best light. The woman examined it from every angle, touched the piping with one gloved finger, leaned in to smell the cake itself. The silence stretched out painfully. This is acceptable, Mrs. Thornton said finally. Acceptable. Not perfect. Not beautiful. Acceptable. Lena's heart sank. However, Mrs. Thornton continued, it's better than anything I've seen in Helena. The craftsmanship is excellent. The flavor, she'd tried a small piece Lena had set aside, is sophisticated without being overwhelming. You have talent, Mrs. Hartley. Relief and pride flooded through Lena in equal measure. Thank you, ma'am. The wedding is in 3 weeks. I'll need the full cake delivered to the church in town on the morning of the 15th. 3 tiers, roses in cream and pale yellow. Can you manage that? Yes. My budget is $75. Lena nearly choked. $75 for 1 cake. That's acceptable, she managed, echoing Mrs. Thornton's earlier assessment. The woman smiled, sharp and knowing. I'll see you on the 15th, Mrs. Hartley. Don't disappoint me. After she left, Lena walked outside and sat down on the porch steps. Just sat there, staring at the mountains, trying to process what had just happened. $75. With what they were already making, that put them within striking distance of the 3,000. We might actually do this, she said aloud to no one. Yeah. Caleb's voice came from behind her. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. We might. They sat in silence, watching the sun move across the sky. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Lena let herself believe they had a chance. Then the rider appeared. He came fast, pushing his horse hard, and Lena knew before he even dismounted that something was wrong. It was a boy from town, maybe 14, out of breath and wild-eyed. Mr. Wilder, Mrs. Hartley! Caleb was on his feet immediately. What's wrong? It's the railroad contract. They're canceling. Said Gant told them there were safety concerns with your operation. Health violations. They can't risk it. The world tilted. That's a lie, Lena said. We've been inspected. We're in compliance with every regulation. Doesn't matter. Gant's got influence. The railroad superintendent is his brother-in-law. They're pulling the contract effective immediately. Caleb's face had gone white. How much were we making from the railroad? $30 a week, Lena said numbly. For the next 2 weeks, that's $60 we just lost. They'd been so close to making the numbers work, and now Gant had cut their legs out from under them again. The boy shifted uncomfortably. There's more. Gant's been talking around town, saying your operation is unsafe, that you're desperate and cutting corners. Some of the other contracts are reconsidering. Lena stood up slowly, fury building in her chest. He's trying to ruin us. He's succeeding, Caleb said flatly. No. Lena turned to face him. No, he's not. We're going to fight this. How? He owns the bank, controls the railroad, has connections everywhere. We're out of options, Lena. We have the wedding cake money, which isn't enough. We need every contract we have plus more to make the loan payment. Without the railroad, the math doesn't work. He was right. Lena knew he was right. But she couldn't accept it, couldn't let Gant win. Then we find another way. There is no other way, Caleb's voice cracked. I've been over the numbers 100 times. I've cut every corner I can cut. I've pushed these men to their breaking point, and it's still not enough. Gant wins, Lena. He always wins. Only if we let him. We don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Caleb laughed bitterly. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, the choice is between losing everything now or losing everything in 2 weeks. Either way, Gray Hollow is done. Either way, I have to tell my daughter we're leaving the only home she's ever known. Lena saw it then, the moment he gave up. The moment hope died in his eyes and left only resignation. And something fierce rose up in her chest. Something that had been building since Charleston, since Travis, since every time someone had told her she wasn't enough. No, she said. No, what? No, you don't get to quit. Not now, not after everything we've fought for. I'm being realistic. You're being a coward. The word hung in the air like a slap. Caleb's face went dark. You want to call me a coward? Fine. But I'm the one who has to look at my daughter and tell her we failed. I'm the one who has to watch Gant take everything Sarah and I built. You're the one choosing defeat before the fight is over, Lena shot back. Gant wants you to give up. He's counting on it. That's why he's spreading lies and cutting contracts. He wants you broken, and you're giving him exactly what he wants. What am I supposed to do, Lena? Please, enlighten me. What magical solution am I missing? I don't know yet, but I know we don't quit. We find another contract. We sell to another town. We work harder. We can't work harder. We're already at the breaking point. Then we break, Lena was shouting now, months of frustration pouring out. We break and we keep going anyway. Because that's what you do when someone tries to destroy you. You refuse to stay down. Caleb stared at her, breathing hard. And in his eyes, she saw all the grief and rage and helplessness he'd been carrying since Sarah died. I can't lose this place, he said, his voice breaking. It's all I have left of her. Then fight for it. I am fighting. No, you're surviving. There's a difference. Lena stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. I spent 3 years surviving my marriage, accepting what Travis did to me, telling myself it was the best I deserved. And you know what I learned? Survival isn't enough. Sometimes you have to actually fight back, even when the odds are impossible. This isn't the same. It's exactly the same. Gan is doing to you what Travis did to me, taking everything and making you believe you're powerless to stop it. But you're not. We're not. Caleb's throat worked. What if we fight and lose anyway? Then at least we tried. At least we didn't give him the satisfaction of watching us surrender. Silence. Long and heavy. Then Caleb said quietly, I don't know how to keep hoping, Lena. I used it all up when Sarah died. Lena's anger dissolved, replaced by understanding, by shared grief. Then use mine, she said, until you find your own again. Something in his expression cracked. The walls he'd built so carefully started to crumble. And then, without thinking, Lena reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched on purpose, the first time she'd breached the careful distance they'd both maintained. Caleb looked down at their joined hands. His fingers tightened around hers. I'm scared, he admitted. Me too. What if this destroys us? It already is. The only question is whether we go down fighting or just go down. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had that night in the storm, seeing her, all of her. All right, he said finally. All right. We fight. Lena nodded, relief and terror warring in her chest. They stood there in the yard, hands still joined, and neither of them noticed Maggie watching from the kitchen window. The little girl who hadn't spoken in 2 years. The little girl who was about to lose everything again. The little girl who'd just started learning how to hope. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, doing math in her head over and over. No matter how she arranged the numbers, they came up short. Even with the wedding cake, even with the remaining contracts, they were still $200 away from making the loan payment. $200 might as well have been $2,000. She got up at 3 in the morning and went to the kitchen, started pulling out flour by lamplight, kneading her hands busy while her mind worked. But for once, baking didn't quiet the panic. It just gave her something to do while she spiraled. You're up early. Lena spun around. Maggie stood in the doorway, still in her nightgown, bare feet on the cold floor. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. Couldn't sleep, Lena said softly. You neither? Maggie shook her head, walked over to the table and climbed into a chair. Just sat there, watching Lena with those 2 old eyes. Lena went back to measuring flour, but her hands weren't steady. She spilled some, cursed under her breath. started over. I'm scared too, she admitted quietly. If that helps. I'm terrified we're going to fail, that everything we've worked for is going to fall apart, and I won't be able to stop it. Maggie's small hand reached across the table and touched the spilled flour, drew a pattern in it with one finger, a circle, 2 dots for eyes, a curved line for a mouth, the same face she'd made weeks ago with dough. But this time, the mouth was turned down. Lena's throat closed up. Yeah, that's how I feel too. They sat together in the pre-dawn darkness, neither speaking, both carrying the weight of what was coming. And Lena realized something that made her chest ache. This little girl had already lost her mother, already learned that the people you love can disappear. And now she was about to lose her home too, unless Lena could figure out how to stop it. She stood up abruptly. Come on. Maggie looked at her, confused. We're going to bake something, not for selling, not for contracts, just for us. Lena pulled out her mother's recipe book, flipped to a page she hadn't looked at in years. My mother used to make these when I was upset, cinnamon cookies. She said sometimes you need something sweet to remember that good things still exist. Maggie slid off the chair and came to stand beside her, watched as Lena measured and mixed. And slowly, without being asked, the little girl started helping, passing ingredients, stirring when Lena's hands were full. They worked in silence, but it was the comfortable kind, the kind that came from understanding each other without needing words. When the cookies came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, Lena set 2 on a plate and poured milk. She and Maggie sat at the table and ate slowly, savoring the sweetness. And for just a moment, the fear receded. Not gone, just quieter. Maggie finished her cookie and did something that made Lena's heart stop. She reached out and took Lena's hand, squeezed it once, then got up and went back to bed without looking back. Lena sat alone in the kitchen, still feeling the ghost of that small hand in hers, and cried for the first time since arriving at Gray Hollow. Not from sadness, from the terrible weight of caring this much about people who weren't hers to keep. Morning came too fast. Lena washed her face, tied back her hair, and went to face another day of impossible work. But when she walked into the kitchen, she found Caleb already there, surrounded by papers. I've been thinking, he said without preamble, about what you said, about fighting back. Lena poured coffee, waiting. Gant's been spreading lies about health violations. What if we turn that against him? How? We get an official inspection from the Territorial Health Office. Get it in writing that our operation meets every standard. Then we take that documentation to every contract Gant's been poisoning and prove he's lying. Lena's mind started racing. That could work. If the inspection is clean, it kills his credibility. But there's a problem. Getting an inspector out here takes time. We'd have to request it, wait for approval, schedule the visit. We don't have that kind of time. Then we don't wait for approval. We go to Helena ourselves, today. We demand an emergency inspection. Caleb looked at her like she'd suggested robbing a bank. You can't just demand an emergency inspection. Watch me. Lena was already untying her apron. Helena's what, 6 hours by train? We go there, make our case, bring an inspector back with us. If we leave now, we could be back by tomorrow night. That's insane. Everything we've done so far has been insane. Why stop now? Caleb stared at her. Then something shifted in his expression, a glint of the fight she'd seen yesterday. All right, let's do it, but one of us needs to stay here to keep production running. I'll go, Lena said immediately. You're needed here to manage the deliveries. No, I'm going. You're needed here because you're the only one who can maintain quality control. Caleb, this isn't a discussion, Lena. I'm going to Helena. You're staying here. His voice softened. Besides, if anyone can sweet-talk a government inspector into an emergency visit, it's you. But I'm the one who needs to do this. I need to fight for my ranch myself. Lena wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in his face and understood. This was about more than logistics. This was about him taking back control. Fine, but take Frank with you. You'll need someone to back up your story. Deal. They were gone within the hour. Lena watched the wagon disappear toward town, toward the train station, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Then she turned back to the kitchen and got to work. The day was brutal. Without Caleb to handle coordination and Frank to manage the bread lines, everything fell on Lena. She baked, supervised, packaged orders. handled a delivery crisis when Pete got lost trying to find a new lumber camp. By the time night fell, she'd been on her feet for 18 hours straight. The hands had all gone to bed. The kitchen was finally quiet. Lena stood at the sink washing the last of the pans and felt exhaustion pulling at her like gravity. The door creaked open behind her. She turned, expecting Maggie, but it was Wyatt, his face pale and tight with pain. "Mrs. Hartley, we've got a problem." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "Pete was making a late delivery to Silver Creek, wagon through a wheel on the way back. He's hurt. Not bad," he added quickly, seeing her face. "But his ankle's twisted up pretty good. He can't walk." "Where is he?" "About 3 miles out. I rode ahead to get help. We need someone to bring the wagon back to get him." Lena looked around the empty kitchen. Every man on the ranch was either injured or asleep from exhaustion. Caleb was in Helena. Frank was with him. "I'll go," she said. "Mrs. Hartley, you've been working all day. So has everyone else. And Pete can't sit out there all night with a twisted ankle." She was already grabbing her coat. "Get me a horse." 20 minutes later, she was riding out into the darkness on a mare named Pepper, following Wyatt's directions. The night was cold and moonless. The mountains were black shapes against a blacker sky. Lena had never been comfortable on horses. Growing up in Charleston, she'd had maybe a dozen riding lessons, all of them supervised and sedate. This was different. The trail was rough, the horse nervous, and Lena was so tired her hands shook on the reins. But Pete needed help. So she kept going. She found him sitting beside the broken wagon, his face gray with pain. His ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, already turning purple. "Mrs. Hartley, you shouldn't have come out here." "Hush." She dismounted clumsily, nearly falling. "Let me see it." The ankle was bad, probably not broken, but badly sprained. She wrapped it tight with strips torn from her petticoat, fashioned a rough splint from pieces of the broken wheel. "Can you ride?" she asked. "I think so, if I can get up." Getting Pete onto the horse was an exercise in controlled disaster. He was a big man, and his ankle couldn't take any weight. Between the two of them, they managed to lever him into the saddle. He gritted his teeth so hard Lena heard them grinding. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know it hurts." "I'm fine. Let's just get home." Lena led the horse back on foot, walking slowly to avoid jostling Pete's ankle. The journey that had taken 20 minutes riding took over an hour walking. By the time Gray Hollow came into view, Lena's legs were shaking and Pete looked like he might pass out. Wyatt and the other hands were waiting. They got Pete down and into the bunkhouse. Lena followed long enough to make sure his ankle was elevated and wrapped properly. Then she stumbled back to the house and collapsed on her bed without even removing her boots. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder. Sunlight was streaming through the door. She'd slept past dawn. "Mrs. Hartley." It was Wyatt again. "We've got another problem." Lena groaned. "What now?" "The order for the fort. It was supposed to be delivered this morning. Pete was handling it, but with his ankle—" "I'll do it." Lena sat up, ignoring the way her head spun. "How far is the fort?" 4 hours there and back, but— "Mrs. Hartley, you need to rest." "I'll rest when we save the ranch." She stood up, swayed, caught herself on the doorframe. "Load the wagon. I'll leave in 20 minutes. The delivery took 6 hours because Lena got lost twice. The fort commander was annoyed at the delay, but accepted the bread. On the way back, one of the wagon wheels hit a rock, and Lena nearly lost control. She made it home just as the sun was setting, hands blistered from the rains, body screaming for sleep. But there was still the wedding cake to work on. Mrs. Thornton's daughter was getting married in 10 days. Lena had practiced the sample tier, but the full 3-tier cake was another level of complexity entirely. She forced herself into the kitchen and started baking the base layers, focused on the work to keep from thinking about how much her body hurt, how tired she was, how close they were to failing. Around midnight, she heard the door open, turned, expecting one of the hands, but it was Maggie. The little girl walked straight to Lena and wrapped her arms around her waist, just held on, silent and fierce. Lena's vision blurred. She knelt down and hugged Maggie back, breathing in the smell of her hair, soap and sunshine and something innocent. "I'm trying," Lena whispered. "I'm trying so hard to fix this." Maggie pulled back, looked at Lena with those serious gray eyes. Then she did something she'd never done before. She took Lena's hand and placed it over her own heart. Let Lena feel it beating. Then she took Lena's other hand and placed it over her own chest, so Lena could feel her heartbeat too. Two hearts. Beating. Alive. Together. Lena understood. We're still here. We're still fighting. Yeah, she said, her voice rough. Yeah, we are. Maggie let go and went back upstairs. And Lena turned back to the cake with renewed determination. Caleb and Frank returned the next evening. Lena was in the barn checking on the horses when she heard the wagon. She ran outside, hope and fear tangled in her chest. Caleb climbed down slowly. He looked exhausted, covered in travel dust, but there was something different in his expression. Well? Lena demanded. He reached into his coat and pulled out an official-looking document. Emergency health inspection, scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Inspector Davies is taking the train tonight and will be here by noon. Relief hit Lena so hard she actually laughed. You did it. How did you convince them? Told them the truth, that a banker with a personal vendetta was spreading false health violations to destroy our business, that we needed official documentation to clear our name. He smiled, tired but genuine. And Frank may have mentioned that his sister's husband works in the territorial governor's office and would be very interested to hear about abuse of banking power. Frank's sister's husband works in the governor's office? Frank shrugged. Might have exaggerated that part, but they didn't know that. Lena started laughing, real, exhausted, slightly hysterical laughter. You lied to a government official. I improvised, Frank corrected. I love you both. The words came out before Lena could stop them. She froze. But Frank just grinned. We love you too, Mrs. Hartley. Now, how about some of that bread everyone keeps talking about? I haven't eaten since yesterday. Caleb was looking at Lena with an expression she couldn't quite read, but he didn't say anything, just followed Frank toward the house. Lena stood in the yard for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. They had a chance, an actual, real chance to fight back against Gant's lies. Then she went inside and started preparing for the inspection. Inspector Davies arrived exactly at noon as promised. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the expression of someone who expected to find violations. He carried a clipboard and an air of bureaucratic authority. Lena had cleaned the kitchen until it gleamed, every surface scrubbed, every utensil polished, the floor mopped twice. She wore her most respectable dress and had pinned her hair back in a severe bun that made her look like someone's schoolteacher. Mr. Davies, she greeted him. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Mrs. Hartley. He didn't offer to shake her hand. I'll need to inspect every aspect of your operation. This will take several hours. Of course. Where would you like to start? He started with the kitchen, examined the stove, the counters, the storage areas, opened every container, checked temperatures, ran his finger along surfaces looking for dust or grease. Lena followed behind him, answering questions, providing documentation of their procedures. She kept her voice calm, professional. But her heart was hammering. If he found violations, real or imagined, Gant would use it to destroy what little credibility they had left. Davies moved to the cold cellar, checked the meat storage, the dairy, the produce, took notes constantly, his face revealing nothing. Then he inspected the baking process itself. Watched Lena make a batch of bread from start to finish. Checked that she washed her hands, that the work surfaces were clean, that the ingredients were properly stored. It took 4 hours. When he finally set down his clipboard, Lena couldn't read his expression. Well, Caleb asked. He'd been standing in the doorway, silent and tense. Davies pulled out a form and started writing. Your operation meets all territorial health standards. In fact, it exceeds them in several areas. I found no violations of any kind. Lena felt her knees go weak. None? None. Whoever reported health concerns was either mistaken or deliberately lying. He handed her a signed document. This certification is valid for 1 year. It confirms that Gray Hollow Bakery maintains proper safety and sanitation standards. Thank you, Lena managed. Thank you so much, Davies nodded. I'll be filing a report about the false allegations as well. If Mr. Gant has been using health concerns to interfere with your business, that's a serious matter. After he left, Lena and Caleb stood in the kitchen, staring at the document like it was made of gold. We've got proof, Caleb said quietly. Actual official proof that Gant's been lying. Now we take this to every contract he poisoned and we get them back. They worked fast. Caleb made copies of the certification at the general store, then they split up. He took the mining camps. Lena took the railroad and the lumber operations. At the railroad office, Lena walked in and placed the certification directly on the superintendent's desk. Mr. Morrison, I believe there's been a misunderstanding about our operation. Morrison, a heavy-set man with mutton-chop whiskers, looked at the document. His face went carefully neutral. I see. Well, this is unexpected. Is it? Lena kept her voice sweet, professional. Because I was told that you canceled our contract based on health concerns. But as you can see, an official territorial inspector found no violations, which makes me wonder where those concerns came from. Morrison shifted in his chair. Mr. Gant may have mentioned Mr. Gant lied, and you believed him without verifying the facts, which means you broke a legally binding contract based on false information. She leaned forward. Now, I'm willing to overlook that mistake. We can reinstate the contract as if this never happened, or I can take this documentation to a lawyer and discuss breach of contract. Your choice. Morrison's face went red. Mrs. Hartley, there's no need for threats. I'm not threatening. I'm giving you options. Which do you prefer? He stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out their old contract and signed a reinstatement order. Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Morrison, Lena said, taking the signed paper. She walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. Caleb had similar success at the mining camps. By the end of the day, they'd recovered 3 of the 4 contracts Gant had poisoned. The 4th, a logging operation, had already signed with another supplier, but they promised to come back to Gray Hollow once that contract expired. That night, they gathered everyone in the kitchen to tally the numbers. Caleb wrote figures on a piece of paper while Lena called out amounts. The hands watched in tense silence. Existing contracts with the recovered railroad and mining operations, Caleb said. $2,200 over the next 2 weeks. The Thornton wedding cake, Lena added. $75. Total $22.75. They needed $3,000. Still short. Still not enough. The silence that followed was heavy. We're closer, Frank said finally. That's something. Closer doesn't pay the loan, Pete muttered. No, but it means we're fighting. Wyatt, still hobbling on his bad ankle, spoke up. Means Gant hasn't beaten us yet. Lena looked at the numbers, her mind racing. $7,225 short. 2 weeks left. We need one more contract, she said. One big one. There aren't any more big ones, Caleb said. We've hit every major buyer in the territory. Then we create one. Everyone looked at her. How? Caleb asked. Lena's mind was working fast, piecing together an idea that was probably insane but might, just might, work. The territorial fair, it's in 9 days, right? In Helena? Yeah, Frank said slowly. So? So there will be hundreds of people there, families, workers, all of them needing to eat. What if we set up a booth, sell bread, pies, pastries, premium prices because it's a special event? Caleb was already shaking his head. The vendor fees for the fair are expensive, at least $50 just for the space. But if we sell enough volume, we make it back and then some. We take everything we can produce for 3 days, sell it all, and use the profits to cover what we're short. That's a huge risk, Frank said. If we don't sell out, we're down $50 we can't afford to lose. And if we do sell out, we make enough to save the ranch. Lena looked around at all of them. We're out of safe options. This is our last shot. Silence. Everyone calculating the odds. Then Maggie walked into the kitchen. She was carrying her hardened dough face, the one she'd made weeks ago. She set it on the table in front of Lena, and then she took Lena's hand and squeezed it. One small gesture of trust, of belief. Caleb saw it. Something in his expression shifted. All right, he said. We do the fair. All in. One last gamble. The next 9 days were chaos. They doubled production, working in rotating shifts around the clock. Every loaf, every pie, every pastry was carefully wrapped and stored. Lena barely slept. The hands worked until they couldn't stand. Even Maggie helped, shaping rolls with her small hands during the day. And Lena worked on the Thornton wedding cake at night. 3 tiers, delicate piping, sugar roses and cream, and pale yellow. Every detail had to be perfect. She was putting the final touches on it, her hands shaking from exhaustion, when the kitchen door opened. Not one of the hands, not Maggie. A man she'd never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes and a smile that made her skin crawl. Mrs. Hartley, I presume? Lena's blood went cold. She knew who this was before he even introduced himself. Warren Gant. The very same. He walked into her kitchen like he owned it, looked around with an expression of studied contempt. Quite an operation you're running here. Shame about the loan. Get out. Now. Is that any way to treat a guest? He picked up one of her tools, examined it. I came to make you an offer. I'm not interested. You haven't heard it yet. He set down the tool. I'll forgive half the loan, $1,500. All Mr. Wilder has to do is sell me Gray Hollow at a fair market price and leave quietly. No. You're not even going to consider it? That's foolish, Mrs. Hartley. You're going to fail. You know it. I know it. This desperate scramble you're engaged in, the contracts, the fair, all of it, it's not going to be enough. You're delaying the inevitable. We're not selling. Not even to save yourselves? To save that little girl upstairs from watching her father lose everything? His smile widened. Because that's what's going to happen. In 5 days, the loan comes due. You won't have the money. The bank will foreclose. And I'll buy this property at auction for a fraction of its value. The only difference is whether Wilder leaves with some dignity or gets dragged out by the sheriff. Lena's hands curled into fists. Why do you want this place so badly? It's just a ranch. It's not about the ranch. It's about winning. Gant's smile turned cruel. Sarah Wilder rejected me. Chose that cowboy over a man who could have given her everything. And then she had the audacity to be happy, to build a life here, to make me look like a fool. So this is revenge. For a woman who rejected you over a decade ago. This is about taking what should have been mine. He moved closer. And there's nothing you can do to stop it, Mrs. Hartley. You're just a divorced woman playing at business. You have no power here. Something in Lena snapped. She'd heard those words before. Different man, same contempt. You're just a woman. You have no power. Travis had said it. Her brother-in-law had said it. Half of Charleston had believed it. And for years she'd believed it too. But she didn't anymore. Lena picked up the cast iron skillet from the stove. The one she used every day. The one that was heavy and solid and had been heating on the burner. Get out of my kitchen, she said quietly. Gant's eyes went to the skillet. Something flickered in his expression, not quite fear, but close. Are you threatening me, Mrs. Hartley? I'm telling you to leave, now. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You came here to intimidate me, to make me feel small. But I've been made to feel small by better men than you, and I survived them. I'll survive you too. For a long moment they stared at each other, Lena holding the skillet, Gant calculating whether she'd actually use it. Then Caleb's voice came from the doorway. She told you to leave, Gant. Gant turned. Caleb was standing there with Frank and Wyatt behind him. All three of them looked ready for violence. This is harassment, Gant said, his composure cracking. I came here to make a legitimate business offer. You came here to threaten a woman alone in her kitchen, Caleb said flatly. That's not business. That's cowardice. Now get off my property before I have you removed. Gant's face went red. You're going to regret this, Wilder. All of you. When you're begging in the street, don't come crying to me. We won't, Lena said. We'll be too busy running our successful business. Gant stormed out. They heard his horse gallop away into the night. Lena set down the skillet. Her hands were shaking. Caleb crossed to her. Are you all right? Yeah, I think so. She looked at him. How much of that did you hear? Enough. His expression was grim. He's not going to let this go, Lena. Win or lose at the fair, he's going to keep coming after us. Then we make sure we win. Caleb studied her face. You're not scared of him. I'm terrified of him, but I'm more terrified of giving up. She met his eyes. We're going to that fair. We're going to sell everything we've made, and we're going to save this ranch. How can you be so sure? Because the alternative is unacceptable. Something passed between them. Understanding, partnership, something deeper that neither of them was ready to name. Then Maggie appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Papa? Both Caleb and Lena froze. Maggie had spoken, one word, broken and rough from years of silence, but spoken. Caleb dropped to his knees. Maggie, baby, I'm here. Is he gone? The bad man? Yes, he's gone. You're safe. Maggie ran to her father and threw her arms around his neck, and this time she spoke again. I was scared. Caleb held his daughter, his face crumbling. Years of grief and relief and hope crashing over him all at once. I know you were, but you're safe. We're all safe. Maggie pulled back, looked at Lena with those serious gray eyes. Mama Lena fought him with the pan. Lena's breath caught. Mama Lena. She looked at Caleb. He was staring at her, tears on his face, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. Yeah, he said softly. She did. Maggie let go of her father and walked to Lena, took her hand. Thank you, she whispered. And Lena, who'd survived divorce and shame and heartbreak, who'd rebuilt herself from nothing, who'd fought for a ranch that wasn't even hers. Lena fell apart. She pulled Maggie into her arms and cried. Great gasping sobs. All the fear and exhaustion and desperate hope she'd been holding in for weeks pouring out. Maggie held her back. This small, brave girl who'd been silent for 2 years, who'd just found her voice because she needed to thank the woman who'd protected her. Caleb stood and wrapped his arms around both of them. And for a moment, in that kitchen, they were a family. Broken, imperfect, held together by desperation and hope. But a family nonetheless. They held each other for a long time in that kitchen. When they finally pulled apart, Maggie's eyes were still red, but there was something different in her face. A lightness that hadn't been there before. I'm hungry, she said quietly, testing her voice, hearing it out loud. Lena laughed through her tears. Of course you are. Let me make you something. Can I help? Those 2 words nearly broke Lena all over again. Yeah, sweetheart, you can help. They made scrambled eggs together while Caleb watched from the doorway. Maggie talked in fits and starts, hesitant like she was remembering how, asking about the eggs, the butter, whether they could add cheese. It was the most ordinary conversation in the world, and it was everything. When they sat down to eat, Caleb couldn't stop staring at his daughter like she might disappear if he looked away. Papa, you're being weird, Maggie said around a mouthful of eggs. He laughed, actually laughed. I know, I'm sorry, I just missed your voice. I missed it too. She looked down at her plate. I wanted to talk after Mama died, but every time I tried, nothing came out, like my throat forgot how. What changed? Lena asked gently. Maggie was quiet for a moment. The bad man scared me. But then you picked up the pan and you weren't scared anymore. Or you were, but you did it anyway, and I thought if you could be brave, maybe I could too. Lena had to look away before she started crying again. Caleb reached across the table and took Lena's hand, squeezed it. No words. Just gratitude too big for language. They finished eating as the sun came up. And for the first time since Lena had arrived at Gray Hollow, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like people actually lived there. But there was no time to celebrate. The territorial fair started in 2 days and they still had mountains of work to do. The next 48 hours were a controlled sprint toward an impossible deadline. They baked every hour they had, filling crate after crate with bread, pies, pastries. Lena worked on the Thornton wedding cake in stolen moments between batches, her hands moving on autopilot. And Maggie talked. Not constantly, there were still long silences where she retreated into herself. But enough. Enough to ask questions. To tell Lena about her mother. To say, I love you to her father for the first time in 2 years. The night before the fair, Lena finished the wedding cake. 3 perfect tiers covered in delicate piping, adorned with sugar roses that looked almost real. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever made. Mrs. Thornton came to inspect it at dawn, walked around it 3 times, examining every detail with a critical eye. It's acceptable, she said finally, the highest praise she'd give. Then she did something unexpected. She handed Lena an envelope. Your payment, plus a little extra. Consider it a tip for exceptional work. Lena opened it. Inside was $100, 25 more than they'd agreed on. Mrs. Thornton, this is too much. Nonsense. Quality deserves to be compensated. Besides, I've already told 6 women about your work. Expect more orders. She paused. I heard about your troubles with Warren Gant. Lena went still. You did? Small territory, Mrs. Hartley. People talk. And for what it's worth, Gant's making enemies faster than he's making friends. The way he's been conducting himself, it's unseemly, vindictive. She sniffed. My husband sits on the territorial banking board. I'll be having a word with him about Mr. Gant's behavior. Thank you, Lena said, surprised. Don't thank me. I simply dislike seeing bullies prosper. Mrs. Thornton nodded once, sharp and final. Good luck at the fair, Mrs. Hartley. I suspect you'll do quite well. After she left, Lena stood holding the envelope, feeling the weight of that extra $25. It wasn't enough to save them alone, but it was a sign that maybe, just maybe, the tide was starting to turn. They loaded the wagons at first light, every inch of space packed with product. Lena had done the math obsessively. If they sold everything at fair prices, they'd make $850. Combined with what they already had, plus the wedding cake money, they'd be exactly $30 short of the loan payment. $30. So close it hurt. We'll figure it out, Caleb said, reading her face. We've come this far. The journey to Helena took most of the day. 2 wagons, 5 people, Caleb, Lena, Frank, Wyatt, and Maggie, who'd insisted on coming. Pete stayed behind to manage the ranch with the other hands. They reached the fairgrounds at sunset. The place was already buzzing with activity, vendors setting up booths, carnival workers assembling rides, livestock being herded into pens. The air smelled like fried food and sawdust and possibility. Their booth space was between a blacksmith demonstrating horseshoes and a woman selling handmade quilts. Not prime real estate, but serviceable. They worked through the night getting set up, built display tables, arranged their products to look appealing, hung a hand-painted sign that said Gray Hollow Bakery in letters Maggie had carefully traced. By the time the sun came up on opening day, Lena had been awake for 36 hours straight, but she put on a clean apron, pinned back her hair, and plastered on a smile. Ready? Caleb asked. No, but let's do it anyway. The gates opened at 8. At first, the crowd was thin, early risers and vendors. Lena stood behind her table, trying not to look desperate as people walked past. Then a woman stopped, middle-aged, carrying a basket. Are those meat pies? Yes, ma'am. Fresh baked yesterday, beef and vegetables. How much? 35 cents. The woman hesitated. It was a premium price. Lena held her breath. I'll take 2. That first sale broke the dam. More people stopped, drawn by the smell of fresh bread, the golden color of the pastries, the fact that everything looked handmade and substantial. By noon, they'd sold half their inventory. Lena worked the crowd like she was back in Charleston society, smiling, chatting, making everyone feel special. Caleb handled money and wrapped purchases. Frank and Wyatt kept the display stocked. And Maggie, with her serious face and quiet voice, charmed every person who talked to her. Did you make these? One woman asked, pointing to the cinnamon rolls. Maggie nodded. Mama Lena taught me. The woman smiled. Well, your mama is very talented. I'll take 6. Lena caught Caleb's eye across the booth. He was grinning. By 4 o'clock, they were down to a quarter of what they'd brought. The money box was getting heavy. People kept coming back with friends, saying, you have to try the bread from that ranch booth. Then a man in an expensive suit stopped at their table. He had the look of someone used to being important. Are you the owner? Lena straightened. Yes, sir. I'm Mrs. Hartley. Samuel Richardson. I run the Northern Pacific Commissary. We feed the railroad crews across 3 territories. He picked up a loaf of bread, examined it. Your reputation precedes you. I've heard good things from the Silver Creek mine. Lena's heart started pounding. We do our best to maintain quality, Mr. Richardson. I'm looking for a new supplier. My current baker retired last month. I need someone who can handle volume. 500 loaves a week, delivered to various camps. Can you manage that? 500 loaves a week. That was more than double their current production. It was impossible. Lena didn't hesitate. Yes, we can. The pay is competitive, 60 cents per loaf. Lena's mind did the math instantly. $300 a week, $1,200 a month. More money than they'd made in the entire past 3 months combined. I'll need a sample to take back to my headquarters, Richardson continued, and references. Of course. Lena's hands were shaking as she wrapped up their best loaf. Our current clients include Silver Creek Mining, the Territorial Fort, and several lumber operations. I can provide contact information. Send it to my office in Helena. If your references check out and my board approves the sample, we'll draw up a contract. He handed her a business card. I look forward to working with you, Mrs. Hartley. After he left, Lena had to sit down. Her legs wouldn't hold her. Did that just happen? Frank asked. I think so. That's a fortune in steady income, Caleb said quietly. Even if we can't start immediately, just having that contract would let us refinance the loan at better terms. We still need to make the payment in 3 days, Lena pointed out. And we're still short. How short? She tallied the cash box. Combined with what they'd already earned, the wedding cake money, and assuming they sold everything they'd brought, $20. So close. They were so impossibly close. The fair ran until 8 o'clock. By 7:30, they'd sold everything except 3 loaves of bread and a handful of rolls. Lena marked them down to bargain prices, desperate to move them. A young couple bought the rolls. An old woman took 1 loaf for her grandchildren. That left 2 loaves and a $5 gap they couldn't close. At 8 o'clock, the fairground started shutting down. Vendors packed up their unsold goods. The crowds dispersed. Lena stood behind their table, staring at those last 2 loaves, feeling victory slip through her fingers. We'll figure something out, Caleb said. But even he sounded defeated. We made it this far, Frank added. That counts for something. But Lena knew better. Being close didn't pay the loan. Close didn't save the ranch. Close was just another word for failure. She was packing up the last of their supplies when she heard a familiar voice. Mrs. Hartley? She turned. Warren Gant stood there, immaculate in a dark suit, looking utterly out of place among the sawdust and carnival debris. Her blood went cold. What are you doing here? I heard you were making quite the spectacle of yourselves. Thought I'd see for myself. He glanced at the nearly empty table, the money box. Looks like you had a successful day. Almost successful enough. We're fine. Are you? Because by my calculations, even with your little windfall here, you're still short of the $3,000. Maybe $10 short. Maybe $20. But short nonetheless. How did he know? Had he been watching them all day, counting their sales? The loan payment isn't due until day after tomorrow, Lena said coldly. We still have time. Time to do what? You've exhausted every option, sold everything you have, worked yourselves half to death. He smiled. And it still wasn't enough. All that suffering, all that hope. For nothing. Caleb stepped forward. Get away from our booth, Gant. Or what? You'll make another scene, please. We're in public. You assault me here and you'll end up in jail, which would make foreclosure proceedings much simpler. Lena felt rage building in her chest. The same rage she'd felt watching Travis gamble away her inheritance, watching her family blame her for her divorce, watching every man in her life take and take and take, while telling her she should be grateful. You really can't stand it, can you? She said quietly. That we might actually win. That Sarah Wilder's family might survive and thrive without you. Gant's smile dropped. Watch your mouth. No. I'm tired of watching my mouth. Tired of being polite to men who don't deserve it. Lena walked around the table, getting in his face. You've spent years trying to destroy Caleb because a woman chose him over you. That's pathetic. You're pathetic. And even if we come up short, even if you take the ranch, you'll still be the sad little man who couldn't accept rejection. Gant's face went purple. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I was married to a man just like you, a bully who tried to make me small so he could feel big. And you know what I learned? Men like you always lose in the end. Because you're so busy destroying other people, you forget to build anything of your own. For a moment, Gant looked like he might hit her. His fists clenched. His jaw worked. But then he saw the crowd gathering, people stopping to watch. Witnesses. He forced a smile. Enjoy your last few days at Gray Hollow, Mrs. Hartley. I'll be sure to send flowers to your next address. He turned and walked away, his back rigid with suppressed fury. Lena stood there, shaking, not from fear, from the sheer relief of finally saying what she'd needed to say for 3 years. Caleb touched her shoulder. You all right? Yeah? Better than all right, actually. That was incredibly reckless. I know, but it felt good. He smiled despite everything. You're something else, Lena Hartley. They finished packing in silence. The fairgrounds emptied around them. By 9 o'clock, they were the last ones left except for a few carnival workers closing up rides. Lena sat on the edge of the wagon, doing math in her head one more time, trying to find those missing $20 somewhere in the numbers. But math didn't care about desperation. $20 short was $20 short. Excuse me? Lena looked up. A woman stood there, maybe 30, wearing a simple dress, holding a sleeping child. I'm sorry to bother you so late. I saw your booth earlier but didn't have money. I was wondering, those last 2 loaves, would you take 50 cents for both? 50 cents. They were worth at least 75. But 50 cents was better than nothing. Of course, Lena said, wrapping them up. The woman handed over the coins. Thank you. My husband works at the railroad camp. He's been talking about your bread for weeks. This is a surprise for him. Wait. Lena pulled out one of the cinnamon rolls they'd kept for themselves. Take this too, for your daughter. I can't afford. It's a gift, for waiting until we were about to close. The woman's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. You're very kind. After she left, Lena counted the money one final time. $2,980. $20 short. They drove back to Gray Hollow in silence, everyone too exhausted and disappointed to talk. Maggie fell asleep against Lena's shoulder. The stars came out, cold and indifferent. They reached the ranch near midnight, helped unload the wagons, put away the empty crates that had held their last hope. When everyone else had gone to bed, Lena sat in the kitchen alone. Tomorrow was the last day before the loan payment was due. Tomorrow, they had to somehow find $20 that didn't exist. The door opened. Caleb came in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. No. He sat down across from her. They drank in silence for a while. I'm sorry, Lena said finally. I promised you we could do this. I was so sure. Don't. Caleb's voice was firm. Don't apologize. You did everything humanly possible. We all did. Sometimes that's just not enough. It should be. Yeah, it should be. He reached across the table and took her hand. But I need you to know something. Even if we lose the ranch tomorrow, even if Gant wins, these past 2 months, they've been the first time since Sarah died that I felt like life was worth living. And that's because of you. Lena's throat tightened. Caleb, let me finish. You came here broken. Same as me. Same as Maggie. And instead of letting that brokenness consume you, you fought. You rebuilt yourself and you pulled us along with you. You gave my daughter her voice back. You gave me hope. That matters, Lena. Whatever happens tomorrow, that matters. She was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. I don't want to lose this place. I don't want to lose you and Maggie. You won't lose us. We'll figure something out. Maybe we go to Oregon, start over. Maybe we find jobs in town. But wherever we go together. He squeezed her hand. You're part of this family now. That doesn't change because we lost a ranch. Lena looked at this man who'd been a stranger 3 months ago, who'd hired her to bake bread and nothing more, who'd become someone she couldn't imagine living without. I love you, she said. Not planned, not practiced, just true. Caleb's eyes widened. Lena, I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I need you to know, in case tomorrow everything falls apart, I love you. And I love Maggie, and I'm not going anywhere. Caleb stood up, walked around the table, and pulled her to her feet. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and fierce, and full of everything they'd both been holding back. All the grief and hope and fear and love tangled up together. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. I love you too, Caleb said. I've loved you since you ran into that storm for my daughter. I was just too scared to admit it. They held each other in that kitchen, neither wanting to let go. Because tomorrow, everything might change. Tomorrow, they might lose everything. But tonight, they had this. The next morning, Lena woke to voices in the kitchen. Multiple voices, all talking at once. She pulled on her dress and went to investigate. The kitchen was full of people. Not just the ranch hands. Townspeople. Clients. People she recognized from the fair. Mrs. Thornton stood in the center of it all, holding an envelope. Mrs. Hartley, good. You're awake. She thrust the envelope at Lena. This is for you. Lena opened it with shaking hands. Inside was cash, lots of it. What is this? After the wedding yesterday, several guests asked where the cake came from. I told them about you, about your situation with Mr. Gant, about how you were fighting to save this ranch. Mrs. Thornton's expression was unreadable. Apparently, Warren Gant has made more enemies than friends in this territory. People jumped at the chance to spite him by helping you. I don't understand. It's prepayment for services, Mrs. Hartley. There's a list in the envelope. 5 wedding cakes, 3 birthday cakes, 2 anniversary celebrations, all paid in advance. Lena counted the money. $350, more than enough to cover what they needed. Mrs. Thornton, I can't accept this. Yes, you can. You've earned it, and you'll earn it again by baking those cakes. This is business, Mrs. Hartley, not charity. Lena looked around at the faces in her kitchen. The railroad foreman who'd given them their first big contract. Carson from Silver Creek Mine. The woman who owned the general store. People who'd watched them fight and decided to fight with them. Thank you, she managed. All of you, thank you. Don't thank us yet, Carson said gruffly. You've still got to deliver on those cakes. I will, I promise. After everyone left, Lena, Caleb, and Frank went to the bank. Walked in exactly at noon, when the loan payment was due, and set $3,000 on Warren Gant's desk. Gant stared at the money like it was a snake. His face went through several colors before settling on a mottled purple. That's not possible. Count it, Caleb said calmly. Gant counted it 3 times. Each time his expression got darker. But the number didn't change. 3,000 exactly. The loan is paid in full, Lena said. I believe you need to provide a receipt. Gant's hand shook as he wrote out the receipt. He practically threw it at them. This doesn't change anything, he said. You'll fail eventually. Everyone does. Maybe, Caleb said, but not today, and not because of you. They walked out of that bank into bright afternoon sunshine, and Lena felt lighter than she had in years. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, against a vindictive banker with unlimited resources, against every expectation, they'd won. That night, they had a celebration. A real one. The hands, Maggie, Caleb, Lena. Frank brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. They drank and laughed and told stories until the stars came out. And for the first time since Lena had arrived at Gray Hollow, the ranch felt like home. 3 months later, Lena stood in the kitchen making bread for the 5th wedding cake order. The Northern Pacific contract had come through, 500 loaves a week at premium prices. They'd hired 4 more bakers to help with production, built an addition to the kitchen, purchased new equipment. Gray Hollow Bakery was thriving, and so was Lena. Caleb came in holding a letter. This just arrived from Helena. Lena wiped her hands and took it, official territorial letterhead. She read it twice to make sure she understood. Warren Gant's been removed from his position at the bank, she said slowly. Banking board found multiple violations. He's being investigated for fraud and abuse of power. Mrs. Thornton's husband came through, Caleb said. Told you she had influence. What happens to Gant now? Don't know. Don't care. He's not our problem anymore. Maggie ran into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. Papa, Mama Lena, come, quick. She'd been calling Lena that for months now. Every time it made Lena's chest feel too full. They followed Maggie outside. In the yard stood a brand new wagon with Gray Hollow Bakery painted on the side in professional lettering. Frank and the other hands were grinning like they'd pulled off the world's best surprise. We pooled our wages, Frank explained. Figured the business needed proper transport and maybe a proper sign, official-like. Lena pressed her hand to her mouth. These men who'd worked themselves half to death to save a ranch that wasn't even theirs, who'd believed in her when she barely believed in herself. It's perfect, she managed. Thank you. That evening, after supper was cleared and the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, Caleb found Lena on the porch. She was watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Got something for you, he said. He handed her a small box. Inside was a ring, simple gold band with a single small diamond. It was Sarah's, he said quietly. I know that might be strange, but she would have wanted you to have it, would have liked you, I think. You're both fighters. Lena looked at the ring, then at Caleb. Are you asking me what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'll marry me. Officially make this family the family it already is. He smiled, nervous. I'm asking if you'll stay. Not because you need a job or a place to hide, but because you want to build a life here. With me and Maggie. Lena thought about Charleston. About the woman she'd been 3 months ago, broken, ashamed, convinced she was too much for anyone to love. About Travis and his lies. About her family's judgment. About every person who'd made her feel small. And then she thought about this ranch, this man, this little girl who called her mama. The life they'd built from nothing but stubbornness and hope. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. They were married 2 weeks later in the front yard of Gray Hollow Ranch. Simple ceremony, just the ranch hands, some townspeople, Mrs. Thornton and her husband, a few clients who'd become friends. Maggie stood between them holding both their hands while the minister said the words. And when he pronounced them husband and wife, when Caleb kissed her in front of everyone, Lena felt something she'd never felt before. Enough. Not perfect, not without scars, not healed from everything that had hurt her, but enough. 5 years later, Lena stood in an expanded kitchen that now took up half the ground floor. 2 assistants worked at one counter, preparing dough for tomorrow's deliveries. Through the window, she could see Maggie, now 12, teaching her younger brother how to shape rolls. Thomas was 4, serious and careful with his small hands, desperate to do everything his big sister did. The baby, Sarah, named for the grandmother she'd never meet, slept in a basket near the warm stove. Gray Hollow Bakery now supplied 15 mining camps, 3 railroad divisions, 2 forts, and had a 6-month waiting list for custom cakes. They'd bought the neighboring property when it went up for sale, built a proper commercial bakery with modern equipment, hired 20 employees. Lena ran it all with the same fierce determination she'd brought to saving the ranch. But now she also knew how to rest, how to let other people help, how to trust that everything wouldn't fall apart if she stopped for 5 minutes. Caleb came in carrying Thomas, who'd apparently decided he was done with bread making. Someone wants his mama, Caleb said, setting the boy down. Thomas ran to Lena and grabbed her legs. Mama, can I have a cookie? After dinner, she said, ruffling his hair. Go help Maggie clean up. He ran off, and Caleb wrapped his arms around Lena from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. You okay? He asked. Yeah, just thinking. About what? About how different everything is. 5 years ago, I showed up here with nothing, broken, ashamed, convinced I'd never be anything more than my failures. And now? Now I run a successful business, have a family, have a home. She turned in his arms. Have a life I actually want instead of one I'm just surviving. Caleb kissed her forehead. You built that life. All of it. I was just smart enough to let you. We built it. Together. Yeah, together. Through the window, Lena watched Maggie lift Thomas up so he could reach the counter. Watched her daughter, because that's what Maggie was now, officially, legally, completely, teach her brother with the same patience Lena had shown her years ago. And she thought about that woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 5 years ago. Dusty and scared and trying so hard to disappear. That woman had believed she was too much, too emotional, too demanding, too broken. But she'd been wrong. She'd been exactly enough. Enough to survive a bad marriage. Enough to start over in a strange place. Enough to fight for people who needed fighting for. Enough to build something from nothing. Enough to be loved, completely, without reservation. The world hadn't changed to make room for her. She'd changed herself. Stopped shrinking. Stopped apologizing. Stopped believing that being herself was something to be ashamed of. And in doing that, she'd found people who loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. That night, after the children were asleep and the kitchen was clean, Lena stood in the doorway looking at the ranch spreading out in front of her. The barn they'd rebuilt. The fields they'd expanded. The house that was too small now, bursting with life and noise and love. Caleb came up behind her. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. How far we've come. Any regrets? Lena thought about Charleston, about the life she could have had if she'd stayed, small and acceptable, safe and suffocating. Not a single one, she said. And she meant it, because the truth was, she'd arrived at Gray Hollow Ranch with dust on her boots and shame in her chest, convinced she was running away from failure, but she hadn't been running away. She'd been running towards something she didn't even know existed. A life where being strong wasn't a flaw, where speaking up wasn't a crime, where loving fiercely and working hard and refusing to stay down were virtues, not vices. She'd been running toward home, and she'd found it in the last place she expected, in a quiet ranch on the edge of Montana, in a man who'd been broken by grief, in a little girl who'd lost her voice, in the simple act of making bread for people who were hungry. The world told women like Lena that they were too much, too loud, too difficult, too demanding. But the world was wrong. There was no such thing as too much, only people too small to handle it. And Lena Hartley, once Caldwell, briefly Boone, now Wilder, had stopped being small the day she picked up that cast iron skillet and decided to fight back. She was enough. She'd always been enough. And this time, finally, she believed it.